I've been a highway patrol officer in Arizona for going on 6 years now, and I can tell you that the desert at night is a different world entirely. Most people don't understand that. They think it's just hot sand and cactus, maybe a few scorpions. But when the sun goes down out here, especially on the long stretches between Phoenix and Tucson, the landscape changes into something that feels almost predatory. The darkness is absolute. No streetlights, no houses, just mile after mile of empty highway cutting through terrain that hasn't changed much since the Spaniards first came through. The silence is what gets to most rookies. It's not peaceful, it's heavy, like the air itself is waiting for something to happen. My name is Thatcher Reddick, and I work the graveyard shift out of District 7, which covers a 90-mile section of State Route 85 between Gila Bend and Aisho. It's one of the least populated patrol zones in the state, which means I spend most of my nights alone in my cruiser, watching the white lines blur past and occasionally pulling over a semi or a drunk driver who thought they could make it to California without getting caught. The job is mostly routine. Speeding tickets, welfare checks, the occasional DUI. But every now and then, something happens out here that doesn't fit into any category I was trained for at the academy. What I'm about to tell you happened in late September of 2023, and it's the reason I requested a transfer to day shift 3 months later. It started just after midnight on a Thursday. I was parked at the turnaround near mile marker 47, finishing up some paperwork from a traffic stop I'd made an hour earlier, when my radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was Maeve Holleran, the night dispatcher for our district. Maeve had been doing this job longer than I'd been alive, and she had this way of sounding calm even when she was relaying something serious. But that night, there was an edge to her voice that I picked up on immediately. Unit 702, this is dispatch. We've got a possible 1053 on Route 85, approximately mile marker 52. Caller reported an abandoned semi blocking the eastbound lane. Caller is a civilian passing through, says the rig's been sitting there with hazards on for at least 20 minutes. No driver visible. Can you respond? I clicked the radio. Copy that, dispatch. I'm about 5 minutes out. Any description of the vehicle? White Freightliner, older model. Caller couldn't see a company name. Said it looked like it had been there a while. No other vehicles in the area. 10-4 en route. I put the cruiser in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The road ahead was empty. Just 2 lanes of cracked asphalt disappearing into the dark. My headlights cut through the night, illuminating saguaro cacti standing like sentinels on either side of the road. The desert out here is flat for miles, and you can see headlights coming from a long way off. But that night, there was nothing. No traffic, no lights, just me and the hum of my engine. As I approached mile marker 52, I saw it. A white semi was parked half on the shoulder, half in the right lane, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically in the darkness. The rig was old, like Maeve had said, with rust stains running down the sides and a trailer that looked like it had seen better days. I slowed down and pulled up behind it, angling my cruiser so the headlights illuminated the back of the truck. I left my light bar on and grabbed my flashlight before stepping out. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Even with my door open and the radio crackling faintly in the background, I couldn't hear anything. No engine idling, no wind, nothing. The air was still and cool, and there was a faint smell I couldn't quite place. Something metallic, almost like rust or old blood. I walked around to the driver's side, shining my light up at the cab. The door was closed, but the window was down. I knocked on the side panel. Highway patrol, anyone in there? No response. I tried the door handle and it opened without resistance. The interior light flickered on, and I stepped up onto the running board to look inside. The cab was empty. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the off position. There was a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder and a crumpled fast food bag on the passenger seat. On the dashboard, there was a small picture taped to the vinyl, a photo of a woman and 2 kids, all smiling, but no driver. I backed down from the cab and walked around to the rear of the trailer. The doors were closed but not locked. I pulled them open and shined my light inside. The trailer was empty except for a few wooden pallets stacked against the far wall. Nothing unusual. I walked back to the front of the truck and checked the engine. It was cold. This thing had been sitting here for a while, longer than 20 minutes. I clicked my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 702. Vehicle is abandoned. No driver on scene. Engine is cold. Looks like it's been here at least an hour, maybe more. Running the plates now." Maeve's voice came back a moment later. "Copy that, 702. Plates come back to a Cole Sutterfield, age 53, out of Flagstaff. Registered owner of the vehicle. No warrants, no priors. You want me to try calling him?" "Yeah, give it a shot. I'm going to do a sweep of the area, see if he wandered off." I spent the next 10 minutes walking the perimeter, shining my flashlight into the brush on both sides of the highway. The desert out here is unforgiving. If someone walked off the road at night, especially without a light, they could get turned around in minutes. Dehydration, snake bites, exposure, it all added up fast. But I didn't see any footprints leading away from the truck, no signs of a struggle. Nothing. Just the empty road and the dark shapes of cacti stretching into the distance. When I got back to my cruiser, Maeve came back on the radio. 702. I tried the number on file for Sutterfield. No answer. Went straight to voicemail. You want me to send a tow? I looked back at the semi sitting there with its hazards still blinking. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Yeah, go ahead and request a tow. I'm going to wait here until they arrive. Let me know if you hear anything from Sutterfield. Will do. Stay safe out there, Thatcher. I sat in my cruiser with the engine running, watching the semi through the windshield. The night was still quiet, almost unnaturally so. I'd been on this stretch of highway hundreds of times, and there was always some kind of ambient noise, coyotes in the distance, the hum of insects, the occasional gust of wind rattling the scrub brush. But that night there was nothing. Just the faint ticking of my engine and the rhythmic blink of the semi's hazard lights. About 20 minutes later, I got out to take another look around. I don't know why. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was instinct, but something made me walk back to the truck one more time. I opened the driver's side door again and leaned in, this time looking more carefully. That's when I saw it. On the floorboard, just under the brake pedal, there was a small dark stain. I crouched down and touched it with my glove. It was wet. I brought my hand up to the light and saw the unmistakable dark red of blood. My pulse quickened. I stood up and scanned the cab more carefully. There were no other signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no torn upholstery. Just that one small stain. I clicked my radio again. Dispatch 702. I've got a possible 1054 here. Found blood in the cab. Not a lot, but it's fresh. Requesting backup in a crime scene unit. Maeve's voice came back, sharper now. Copy that, 702. Closest unit is about 30 minutes out. CSI will take longer. Do you need immediate assistance? I looked around at the empty highway, the dark desert stretching out in every direction. Negative. I'm secure for now. Just get them here as soon as you can. I walked back to my cruiser and grabbed my handheld spotlight, the big one we use for searching fields and ditches. I aimed it at the surrounding area, sweeping it slowly across the landscape. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of sand and scrub, the skeletal shapes of dead trees, and the occasional glint of eyes from some animal watching from a distance. But no sign of Cole Sutterfield. I was about to turn the light off when I caught something in the beam. About 50 yards off the right side of the highway, there was a shape that didn't belong. It looked like a person, but it was hard to tell from that distance. I kept the light on it and watched. The shape didn't move. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward it, moving carefully through the loose rocks and patches of dried grass. As I got closer, I could see more detail. It was definitely a person, or at least the outline of one. They were standing completely still, facing away from me. I stopped about 20 feet away and called out, "Sir, this is the highway patrol. Are you Cole Sutterfield?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. I took a few more steps forward, my hand instinctively moving to the grip of my sidearm. "Sir, I need you to turn around slowly and show me your hands." Still nothing. I was close enough now to see that it was a man, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. His arms were hanging at his sides and his head was tilted slightly forward, like he was looking at the ground. I moved to the side to get a better angle, and that's when I saw his face. It was Cole Sutterfield. I recognized him from the DMV photo Maeve had pulled up earlier. But something was wrong. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused on anything. His mouth was slightly open, and there was a thin line of dried blood running from his nose down to his chin. "Mr. Sutterfield?" I said, stepping closer. "Can you hear me?" He didn't blink, didn't move. I reached out and touched his shoulder, gently at first, then more firmly. His body swayed slightly but didn't fall. That's when I realized he wasn't standing on his own. I crouched down and shined my light at his feet. They were off the ground, just barely, maybe an inch or two. He was suspended somehow, held up by something I couldn't see. I backed away quickly, my heart pounding. "Dispatch 702. I've located the driver. He's not responsive. I need EMS out here now." Maeve's voice was tense. "What's his condition?" I didn't know how to answer that. I looked back at Cole, still hanging there in the darkness, his eyes staring at nothing. "I don't know. Just get them here." I moved around to the front of him, trying to see what was holding him up. That's when I saw the wire. It was thin, almost invisible in the dark, wrapped around his torso just under his arms. It was attached to something behind him, but I couldn't see what. I followed the line with my flashlight and it led back toward the highway, disappearing into the shadows near the semi. I should have waited for backup, I know that. But something about the way he was just hanging there like a puppet on strings made me need to understand what was happening. I walked back toward the truck, following the wire. It ran along the ground, barely visible against the dirt, and disappeared under the rear axle of the trailer. I crouched down and looked underneath. The wire was tied to the frame, looped several times and knotted tightly. I stood up and walked back to Cole. He was still there, still motionless, still staring. I clicked my radio one more time. "Dispatch, this is 702. Cancel EMS. Send the coroner instead." Maeve didn't ask questions. "Copy that. ETA 45 minutes. I sat down on a flat rock about 10 yards away and waited. The desert was still silent. The hazard lights on the semi kept blinking, on and off, casting faint red shadows across the sand. And Cole Sutterfield hung there in the darkness, suspended between the road and the nothing beyond it, like he'd been left there for me to find. By the time the sun started to rise over the Sonoran Desert, the scene at mile marker 52 had transformed into something that looked more like a military operation than a traffic stop. There were at least a dozen patrol units parked along both sides of Route 85, their light bars creating a constant strobe of red and blue against the pale morning sky. CSI vans, a mobile command unit, and even a news helicopter circling overhead. The whole area had been cordoned off with yellow tape, and uniformed officers were walking grid patterns through the brush, searching for evidence. I'd been awake for almost 30 hours straight by that point, but there was no way I could sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cole Sutterfield hanging there in the darkness, his face frozen in that empty stare. Sergeant Vance had told me to go home around 4 a.m., said I'd done my part and they'd call me if they needed anything else, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I sat in my cruiser with the windows down, drinking lukewarm coffee from a thermos and watching the investigators work. Around 6:30 a.m., Vance walked over and tapped on my window. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes and his shirt untucked. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." He nodded and leaned against the side of my cruiser. "We've identified the second victim. Her name was Inez Valera. She worked at a diner in Gila Bend, been missing for 3 days. Her manager reported her when she didn't show up for her shift on Monday. We thought she'd just skipped town, maybe had family problems. Turns out she was already dead by then." I took a sip of coffee, trying to process what he was saying. 3 days. That means whoever did this kept her somewhere before bringing her out here. That's what we're thinking. And there's something else. We found tire tracks about 100 yards south of the scene. Fresh ones, probably from last night. They don't match the semi or any of the patrol vehicles. We're having them analyzed now, but it looks like someone else was here around the time you arrived. A chill ran down my spine. "You think they were watching?" Vance didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the desert, squinting against the early morning sun. "I think whoever did this wanted it to be found. The way the bodies were positioned, the wires running back to the truck, it's all too deliberate. They weren't trying to hide what they did. They were showing it off." I thought about that for a moment. So, what do we do now? Now, we process everything and hope we get lucky. But I need you to do something for me, Reddick. I need you to go home, get some sleep, and try to forget about this for a few hours. You've been out here all night, and you're no good to anyone running on empty. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, heading west toward my apartment in Gila Bend. The drive should have taken about 20 minutes, but I found myself going slower than usual, watching the desert roll past and thinking about what Vance had said. Someone had been watching. Someone had been out there in the dark while I was standing next to those bodies, and I hadn't even known it. When I got home, I tried to sleep, but it was useless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wires stretched across the sand, disappearing into the darkness. I kept hearing Maeve's voice on the radio, calm and professional, telling me that backup was en route. I wondered if she knew how bad it was, if she'd been listening when I found the second body. Around noon, I gave up and got out of bed. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. I should have left it alone. I should have listened to Vance and let the investigators do their job. But something was nagging at me, a detail I couldn't quite place. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Highway Patrol's internal database, logging in with my credentials. I typed in Cole Sutterfield's name and scanned through his file. Clean record, no warrants, no history of violence. He'd been driving trucks for almost 30 years, mostly long hauls between Arizona and California. Nothing unusual. Then I searched for Inez Valera. Her file was shorter. A few minor traffic violations, nothing serious. She'd lived in Gila Bend her whole life, worked at the same diner for 15 years. No criminal record, no red flags. On the surface, these two people had nothing in common. Different ages, different occupations, different backgrounds. So why had they been killed together? Why had their bodies been left at the same location? I spent the next hour searching through missing persons reports, cross-referencing names and dates. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I had a feeling there was something I was missing. And then I found it. A report filed 6 weeks earlier about a man named Gideon Cray. He was 68 years old, a retired rancher from Ajo. According to the report, he'd left his house one morning to drive into town for supplies and never came back. His truck was found 3 days later on a dirt road about 10 miles outside of Ajo, abandoned and empty. No signs of foul play, no evidence of where he'd gone. The case had gone cold after 2 weeks. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Ajo was less than 50 miles from where we'd found Cole and Inez. It could have been a coincidence, but something told me it wasn't. I grabbed my phone and called Vance. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Reddick, this better be important. I think there might be another victim. A man named Gideon Cray went missing 6 weeks ago near Ajo. His truck was found abandoned, no body, no leads. It matches the pattern." There was a long pause on the other end. What pattern? The victims. They're all people who disappeared without a trace, and then their bodies turn up in staged crime scenes. I think whoever's doing this has been at it for a while. Vance was quiet for a moment. "Send me the case file. I'll look into it." "But Reddick, I meant what I said earlier. You need to step back and let us handle this." "Yes, sir." I hung up and sent him the file, but I knew I wasn't going to step back. I couldn't. This case had gotten under my skin in a way that nothing else had, and I needed to understand what was happening. That night, I went back to work. My shift started at 10 p.m., and I was assigned to the same stretch of Route 85. Maeve was on dispatch again, and she greeted me with her usual calm professionalism, but I could hear the strain in her voice. "Good to have you back, 702. Command wants you to do a standard patrol tonight. No deviations, no investigations. Just keep an eye on the highway and report anything unusual." "Copy that, dispatch." I spent the first few hours driving up and down the road, checking speed limits and responding to a couple of minor calls. But my mind kept wandering back to the scene from the night before. I couldn't stop thinking about those wires, the way they'd been tied so carefully, the way the bodies had been positioned. It felt personal somehow, like whoever did this had put thought and care into every detail. Around 1:30 a.m., I was parked at a rest stop near mile marker 38 when my radio crackled. "Unit 702, this is dispatch. We've got a report of a disabled vehicle on Route 85, approximately mile marker 61. Can you respond?" Mile marker 61 was about 9 miles past where we'd found the bodies. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Copy that, dispatch, en route." As I drove toward the location, I kept scanning the sides of the road, looking for anything out of place. The desert was dark and empty, just like it had been the night before. When I reached mile marker 61, I saw a car parked on the shoulder with its hood up. It was an older sedan, gray or silver in the moonlight. I pulled up behind it and turned on my spotlight, illuminating the vehicle. There was no one inside. I stepped out of my cruiser and approached cautiously, my hand resting on my sidearm. "Highway Patrol, is anyone here?" No response. I walked around to the front of the car and looked under the hood. The engine was cold. This car had been sitting here for a while. I checked the interior with my flashlight. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. There was a purse on the passenger seat, still zipped up. I opened the driver's side door and checked the registration. The car belonged to a woman named Marla Jennison, age 42, address in Phoenix. I clicked my radio. "Dispatch 702, vehicle is abandoned, registered to a Marla Jennison out of Phoenix. No driver on scene, requesting a welfare check at the registered address." Maeve's voice came back immediately. "Copy that, 702. Stand by." I walked around the car, shining my flashlight on the ground. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They led away from the driver's side door, heading off into the desert. I followed them with my light, and they disappeared into the darkness about 20 yards out. I should have called for backup. I should have waited. But something made me follow those tracks. I walked slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed at the ground. The footprints were clear in the soft sand, small and narrow, probably from a woman's shoe. They led in a straight line away from the highway, weaving between patches of creosote and brittlebush. After about 50 yards, the tracks stopped, just ended, like the person had vanished into thin air. I stood there, scanning the area with my light. Nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle, nothing. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A sound like metal scraping against rock. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing, but it was there. I turned towards the noise and started walking. The sound got louder as I moved deeper into the desert. And then I saw it. There was a structure ahead, partially hidden behind a cluster of large boulders. It looked like an old mining shack, the kind that prospectors used back in the early 1900s. The walls were made of weathered wood and corrugated metal, and the roof had partially collapsed. The door was hanging open, swaying slightly in the breeze. That was the sound I'd heard. Metal scraping against rock. I approached slowly, my weapon drawn now. "Highway patrol, if anyone's in there, come out with your hands visible." Nothing. I reached the doorway and shined my light inside. The interior was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a dirt floor and walls covered in graffiti and rust stains. There was an old metal cot in one corner, and a wooden chair in the center of the room. And sitting on that chair was Marla Jennison. She was facing away from me, her hands resting on her lap, her head tilted slightly to one side. I could see the back of her neck, pale in the beam of my flashlight. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't move. I stepped inside, keeping my weapon raised. "Ma'am, I'm with the highway patrol. I need you to respond if you can hear me." Still nothing. I moved around to the front of her, and that's when I saw her face. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, but they weren't seeing anything. Her mouth was slightly open, and there was a thin line of dried blood running from her ear down to her jaw. She was dead, and just like Cole and Inez, she had a wire wrapped around her torso. This one was thinner, almost like fishing line, and it ran from her body up to a beam in the ceiling, holding her upright in the chair. I backed out of the shack and immediately called it in. "Dispatch 702, I've got another body. Female victim appears to be Marla Jennison. Same MO as last night. I need backup and CSI at my location immediately." Maeve's voice was tight. "Copy that, 702. Units are rolling. Stay at the scene and do not enter the structure again." I stood outside the shack, my heart pounding. This was the third victim in 2 days, and they were all connected by those wires. Someone was doing this deliberately, and they were getting bolder. I thought about what Vance had said. They weren't trying to hide what they did. They were showing it off. And now they were leading us to the bodies, leaving them in places where they knew we'd find them. I heard the sound of approaching sirens, and within minutes, the area was flooded with patrol cars and CSI vans. Vance arrived shortly after, and he walked straight over to me. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at the shack and then back at me. "You found this by following footprints?" "Yes, sir. They led from the car to here." He nodded slowly. "Reddick, I need you to be honest with me. Do you think someone is leading you to these scenes?" I thought about it for a moment. I don't know. Maybe. It feels too convenient, like everything is being set up for me to find. Vance looked back at the shack. I think you're right. And that means whoever's doing this knows who you are. The realization that someone knew who I was changed everything. I spent the next 3 days off duty, ordered by Vance to stay away from the investigation while they processed the evidence from all 3 crime scenes. But staying away didn't mean I stopped thinking about it. Every time my phone rang, every time I heard a car door slam outside my apartment, I felt my pulse spike. I kept the blinds closed and my service weapon within arm's reach at all times. On the 4th day, Vance called me and asked me to come down to the district office in Phoenix. He didn't give me any details over the phone, just said it was important and that I needed to be there by 2 p.m. I drove up from Gila Bend, taking surface streets instead of the highway. I told myself it was because of traffic, but the truth was I didn't want to be on Route 85 unless I absolutely had to be. When I arrived at the district office, Vance was waiting for me in one of the conference rooms. There were files spread across the table, photographs pinned to a whiteboard, and a laptop open with what looked like surveillance footage paused on the screen. He gestured for me to sit down. "Thanks for coming in, Reddick. I know you've had a rough few days. What did you find?" He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "We've connected 4 victims so far. Cole Sutterfield, Inez Valera, Marla Jennison, and Gideon Cray. Cray's body was found yesterday morning about 10 miles outside of Ajo, same MO. Wire suspension, deliberate placement. But here's what's interesting. None of these people knew each other. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of the state. The only thing they have in common is that they all disappeared while driving alone on rural highways at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, we're looking at a serial killer. That's what it looks like. And based on the timeline, we think there might be more victims we haven't found yet. Cray disappeared 6 weeks ago, but his body was only discovered after you found the others. That suggests our suspect has been doing this for a while, and they're accelerating." He pulled up a photograph on the laptop and turned it toward me. It showed tire tracks in the sand, illuminated by camera flash. "These are the tracks we found near the scene where you discovered Cole and Inez. We ran them through our database and got a partial match. The tread pattern is consistent with the Ford F-250, model year 2015 to 2018. Dark color, probably black or dark blue. We've got Bolo out on every vehicle matching that description in a 200-mile radius." I studied the photograph, trying to memorize the pattern of the treads. "That's a pretty common truck around here." "I know, but it's a start." He pulled up another image, this one showing a blurry figure standing next to a vehicle. This was pulled from a gas station camera in Gila Bend, 3 hours before you found the first bodies. The timestamp matches up with when Cole Sutterfield was last seen alive. We're still trying to enhance the image, but you can see someone in the frame. White male, tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", that's about all we can make out. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the grainy footage. The figure was standing next to a truck at one of the pumps, but their face was turned away from the camera. "You think that's our suspect?" "We don't know yet, but here's the thing that bothers me." He pulled up a different video file, this one showing the interior of the gas station. "This is from the same location, same night, about 20 minutes later. Watch the timestamp." He pressed play, and I watched as a figure walked into the frame. It was a man wearing jeans and a dark jacket, his face partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. He walked up to the counter, paid for his gas in cash, and then turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, he stopped and looked directly at the camera. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, his face was visible. Then he walked out. Vance paused the video on that frame. The man's face was clearer now, caught in the overhead lights of the store. He was in his 40s or early 50s, with a heavy beard and deep-set eyes. But what stood out most was his expression. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost playful, like he was in on a joke that nobody else understood. We ran facial recognition on this image. No matches in our database, no criminal record, no priors, nothing. Whoever this is, they've never been arrested. Vance closed the laptop and looked at me. But here's what really concerns me. That same truck was picked up on a traffic camera near mile marker 61, right around the time you responded to the call about Marla Jennison's vehicle. They were there, Reddick. They were watching you. The room suddenly felt smaller. I thought about standing in that mining shack, looking at Marla's body suspended in the chair, the wire pulled tight around her torso. Someone had been out there in the darkness, close enough to see me, close enough to hear my radio calls. Why didn't they try to stop me? Why let me find the bodies? That's what we're trying to figure out. My theory is that this isn't about the victims anymore. It's about the investigation. They want us to find these people. They want us to see what they've done, and for some reason, they've chosen you as their audience. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what he was saying. So, what do we do now? Vance pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. We keep you safe. Starting tonight, you're being reassigned to administrative duty until we catch this person. You'll work out of this office, no more patrol shifts, no more highway calls. I've already cleared it with the captain. I opened the folder and scanned the paperwork inside. It was a temporary reassignment order, effective immediately. You're pulling me off the road. For your own protection, yes. Whoever this is knows your patrol route, knows your vehicle number, probably knows where you live. I'm not taking any chances. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that I could handle myself, that I wasn't going to let some psychopath dictate my career. But I knew he was right. This person had already killed 4 people that we knew of, maybe more. And if they were targeting me specifically, staying on patrol was just asking for trouble. What about the investigation? Are you bringing in outside help? FBI's already involved. They're sending a profiler down from Quantico next week. In the meantime, we're doing everything we can to identify this suspect and track down that truck. But I need you to stay out of it, Reddick. No more lone wolf detective work, no more midnight drives to check on leads. You're off this case, understood? Yes, sir. I left the district office around 4 p.m. and drove back to Gila Bend, taking the long way through surface streets and back roads. The sun was starting to set by the time I got home, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I parked in my usual spot and sat in my car for a moment, watching the shadows grow longer across the parking lot. My apartment complex was quiet, just a few other cars scattered around and the faint sound of someone's television through an open window. I grabbed my bag and headed up to my unit on the 2nd floor. As I reached my door, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a piece of paper tucked under the welcome mat. I bent down and picked it up carefully, holding it by the corner. It was a photograph. The image showed me standing next to my patrol car at mile marker 52, the abandoned semi visible in the background. It had been taken the night I found Cole and Inez. On the back, written in neat block letters, was a single sentence. "You're doing great work, Officer Reddick." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Vance. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "They were here, at my apartment. They left a photograph." "Don't touch anything else. I'm sending a unit to your location right now. Get inside, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone except uniformed officers. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I unlocked my door and went inside, making sure to lock and chain it behind me. I checked every room, every closet, even looked under the bed. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But the photograph had been taken from outside, which meant someone had been standing in that parking lot watching me, close enough to walk up to my door and leave that picture without anyone noticing. I sat on my couch with my weapon in my lap, waiting for backup to arrive. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling. I kept replaying the image in my mind, the angle of the shot, the distance from the camera to where I'd been standing. Whoever took that picture had been maybe 30 or 40 yards away, standing somewhere in the desert with a decent camera and a clear line of sight. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside, followed by a knock on the door. "Highway Patrol, Officer Reddick, it's Sergeant Vance." I looked through the peephole and saw Vance standing there with 2 uniformed officers. I unlocked the door and let them in. Vance immediately took the photograph from me, holding it carefully in a gloved hand. "We'll get this processed. In the meantime, you're not staying here tonight. We're putting you up in a safe location until we figure out what's going on." "A safe house?" "A hotel, actually. Tucson, away from your normal routine. You'll check in under a different name, and we'll have an officer posted outside your room. It's just temporary until we can assess the threat level." I packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days, grabbed my laptop and some files I'd been reviewing, and followed Vance down to his unmarked sedan. The drive to Tucson took about 90 minutes, and we spent most of it in silence. I kept watching the side mirrors, looking for vehicles that might be following us, but the highway was mostly empty. The hotel was a mid-range chain off Interstate 10, the kind of place that catered to business travelers and families passing through. Vance checked me in at the front desk while I waited in the car, then walked me up to a room on the 3rd floor. It was clean and generic, 2 beds, a desk, a TV mounted on the wall. He handed me a keycard and a burner phone. "Use this if you need to contact me. Don't use your personal phone. Don't post on social media. Don't tell anyone where you are. Not friends, not family, nobody. Officer Halverson will be posted in the hallway. If you need anything, let him know." I nodded and set my bag on the bed. "How long do you think I'll need to stay here?" "I don't know. A few days, maybe a week. We're working as fast as we can, but this guy is careful. He hasn't left much evidence, and what we do have isn't leading anywhere yet." He paused at the door. "Get some rest, Reddick. You look like you haven't slept in days." After he left, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. The room was quiet, the kind of sterile silence that only exists in hotels. I thought about the photograph, about the message written on the back. "You're doing great work." It was almost mocking, like whoever wrote it was proud of me for finding their victims, like I was playing a role in some sick game they'd designed. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wires stretched across the desert, heard the sound of metal scraping against rock. Around midnight, I gave up and opened my laptop. I knew Vance had told me to stay out of the investigation, but I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I logged into the Highway Patrol database and started searching through old missing persons cases, looking for patterns. It took me about an hour to find something. A woman named Clara Tyndall had disappeared 7 months earlier while driving from Tucson to Phoenix. Her car was found abandoned on Highway 79, doors locked, keys in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no body, no leads. The case had gone cold after 3 weeks. I pulled up her photograph and felt my stomach drop. She looked similar to Inez and Marla, middle-aged, average height, brown hair, another solo driver on a rural highway. I kept searching. Over the next 2 hours, I found 3 more cases that matched the pattern. All disappeared while driving alone at night, all found abandoned on rural highways, all with minimal evidence. None of the bodies had been recovered. Until now. I grabbed the burner phone and called Vance. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "This better be good, Reddick." I found more victims, at least 4 more cases that match the pattern. They all disappeared within the last year, all on rural highways. I think our suspect has been doing this a lot longer than we thought. There was a long pause. "Send me the case numbers. I'll have someone look into it in the morning." "Vance, if I'm right, there could be more bodies out there. We need to search the areas where these people disappeared. And we will. But not tonight. You need to stay where you are and let us handle this. That's an order." I hung up and sent him the case numbers, then closed the laptop and lay back on the bed. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I thought about all those missing people, all those families still waiting for answers. And somewhere out there in the Arizona desert, someone was watching, planning their next move, knowing that we were one step behind. I stayed in that Tucson hotel for 6 days. 6 days of staring at the same beige walls, ordering room service, and watching Officer Halverson change shifts with other patrol officers every 12 hours. Vance called me twice a day with updates, most of which weren't encouraging. The FBI profiler had arrived and spent 3 days reviewing the evidence, but their assessment was vague. White male, probably in his 40s or 50s, organized, methodical, likely living alone. Nothing we didn't already know. The tire tracks from the F-250 had led to 37 possible matches in the Phoenix metro area alone, and investigators were working through them one by one. The surveillance footage from the gas station had been enhanced, but the image quality was still too poor to get a clear identification. The photograph left at my apartment had been processed for prints and DNA. Nothing. Whoever this person was, they were careful. On the 7th day, Vance showed up at my hotel room around 10 a.m. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes bloodshot. He sat down on the chair by the window and didn't say anything for a long moment. I knew immediately that something had happened. "We found another body," he finally said. "Clara Tyndall, the missing woman you flagged in your research. Highway maintenance crew spotted her yesterday morning, about 5 miles off Highway 79. Same MO, wire suspension, deliberate placement." I felt my chest tighten. That makes 5 confirmed victims. 6, actually. We found another one this morning. A man named Burke Lattimore disappeared 3 months ago near Casa Grande. His body was discovered at an abandoned rest stop on Highway 87. Vance leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. But here's what's different about this one. He was positioned differently, not suspended by wires. He was sitting in a patrol car. The room suddenly felt very cold. "What do you mean?" "Someone broke into the impound lot in Casa Grande 2 nights ago and stole a decommissioned highway patrol cruiser. They drove it out to that rest stop, put Lattimore's body in the driver's seat, and left it there with the engine running and the light bar on. A civilian called it in around 6 a.m., thought it was an officer who needed assistance." Vance pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but I could clearly see the white and tan patrol car parked at the rest stop, its lights flashing in the early morning darkness. "They're escalating," I said quietly. "It's more than that. They're sending a message. This isn't about the victims anymore. It's about us, about you." He put his phone away and looked at me. "We found something else at the scene, another photograph, this one taped to the steering wheel. It shows you walking into this hotel 6 days ago." My blood ran cold. "They followed us here. That's what it looks like. Which means staying in this hotel isn't keeping you safe anymore. We're moving you again tonight to a different location, somewhere more secure." "Where?" "A safe house in Flagstaff. It's off the grid, owned by the state, used for witness protection cases. Only a handful of people will know you're there. You'll stay until we catch this person or until the threat level decreases. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. The midday sun was bright, reflecting off the hoods of cars and heating the asphalt until it shimmered. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But I knew better now. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone who knew my name, my face, where I worked, where I lived. Someone who had been planning this for months, maybe years, and was now accelerating towards something I couldn't predict. What if moving again doesn't work? I asked. What if they find me no matter where I go? Vance stood up and joined me at the window. Then we changed tactics. We stopped running, and we set a trap. I looked at him, using me as bait. Only if you agree to it, and only with full tactical support. But Reddick, I'm not going to lie to you. This person is fixated on you specifically. They've made that clear. And as long as you're out of sight, they're going to keep killing to get your attention. I thought about all those victims. Cole Sutterfield with his family photo taped to the dashboard. Inez Valera, who'd worked at the same diner for 15 years. Marla Jennison, whose car I'd found abandoned on the highway. They were dead because of me, because someone wanted to play a game and had chosen me as their opponent. The guilt was overwhelming. What did you have in mind? Vance outlined his plan. It was simple, maybe too simple, but it was all we had. I would go back to my normal routine, back to my apartment in Gila Bend, back to patrol shifts on Route 85. But I wouldn't be alone. There would be undercover officers positioned at strategic points along my route, surveillance teams monitoring my apartment, tracking devices on my vehicle. The moment this person made contact, we'd have them. How soon can we start? I asked. 2 days. We need time to position everyone and brief the teams. In the meantime, you'll stay at the safe house in Flagstaff. We left the Tucson hotel that afternoon, Vance driving and me in the passenger seat. Officer Halverson followed in a separate vehicle. We took surface streets for the first hour, constantly checking mirrors and changing routes to make sure we weren't being followed. By the time we reached Flagstaff, it was dark. The safe house was a small cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by ponderosa pines and set back from the main road. It was isolated, quiet, and exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear for a while. Vance walked me through the security measures, showed me the panic button installed in every room, and introduced me to the 2 officers who would be stationed outside around the clock. I spent the next 2 days preparing mentally for what was coming. I cleaned my service weapon, reviewed tactical scenarios, and tried to sleep, though it rarely lasted more than a few hours at a time. Every noise outside the cabin made me sit up in bed, my hand automatically reaching for the gun on the nightstand. But it was always just the wind in the trees or an animal moving through the underbrush. On the morning of the 3rd day, Vance arrived with my patrol uniform and equipment. "You ready for this?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. "Let's do it." The drive back to Gila Bend took 3 hours. By the time we arrived, the sun was high in the sky and the temperature was pushing 95 degrees. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it almost 2 weeks earlier. I checked every room, every closet, looking for signs that someone had been inside. Everything was in place. That night, I reported for my shift at 10 p.m. Maeve was on dispatch, and when I checked in, I could hear the relief in her voice. "Good to have you back, 702. Command has you on standard patrol tonight. Route 85, mile markers 38 through 62. Copy that, dispatch." I spent the first few hours driving up and down the highway, hyper-aware of every vehicle I passed, every set of headlights in my rearview mirror. I knew the surveillance teams were out there somewhere, watching, but I couldn't see them. That was the point. I was supposed to look alone, vulnerable, an easy target. Around 1:30 a.m., I was parked at the turnaround near mile marker 47 when my radio crackled. Unit 702, we've got a report of a disabled vehicle on Route 85, mile marker 58. Can you respond? Mile marker 58. That was right in the middle of where the first bodies had been found. I felt my pulse quicken. Copy that, dispatch. En route. As I drove toward the location, I kept my radio close, ready to call for backup at the first sign of trouble. When I reached mile marker 58, I saw it. A dark-colored pickup truck parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. Ford F-250, just like Vance had described. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I pulled up behind the truck and called it in. Dispatch 702, I'm on scene with the disabled vehicle, running the plates now. I ran the plate through the system. It came back registered to a business address in Phoenix, no flags or warrants. I stepped out of my cruiser, my hand resting on my sidearm, and approached the driver's side of the truck. The window was down. I shined my flashlight inside. The cab was empty. Highway patrol, I called out. Is anyone here? No response. I walked around to the back of the truck and checked the bed. It was empty, except for some tools and a spare tire. I was about to head back to my cruiser when I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, coming from somewhere in the desert. Officer Reddick. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. About 50 yards off the road, I could see a figure standing motionless. They were facing me, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a dark shape against the darker desert. This is the highway patrol, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Identify yourself. The figure didn't move. You've been looking for me. My hand moved to my weapon. I need you to show me your hands and walk toward me slowly. I've been watching you, Officer Reddick, watching you find them. You did exactly what I knew you would do. You're very predictable. I clicked my radio with my free hand. 702, requesting immediate backup. Suspect on scene, mile marker 58. The figure took a step forward, and in the beam of my flashlight I could finally see their face. It was the man from the gas station surveillance footage. Heavy beard, deep-set eyes, that same unsettling expression. He was holding something in his right hand, but I couldn't tell what it was. Don't move, I said, drawing my weapon. Put your hands up where I can see them. He stopped walking but didn't raise his hands. Do you want to know why I chose you? In the distance, I could hear sirens. The backup units were coming. I just needed to keep him talking, keep him in place until they arrived. Why did you kill those people? He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. I didn't kill them for any reason that would make sense to you. I killed them because I could. Because the desert is full of people who drive alone at night, and nobody notices when they disappear. Not for days, sometimes weeks. And when they do notice, nobody knows where to look. He took another step forward. But you found them. You found all of them. That's why I chose you, because you're the only one who's been paying attention. The sirens were getting louder, maybe a minute away now. Put down whatever you're holding and get on the ground. Now. He smiled, and it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I'm not going to do that, Officer Reddick, because this isn't over. You think you found all the bodies? You haven't. There are more, so many more, and you're going to spend the rest of your career looking for them. He raised his right hand and I saw what he was holding. It was a wire, thin and gleaming in the flashlight beam, and then he turned and ran into the darkness. Suspect is fleeing on foot, heading east into the desert. I radioed, and I took off after him. I should have waited for backup, I know that, but something in me snapped, all the fear and frustration from the past 2 weeks boiling over. I chased him through the scrub and rocks, my flashlight bouncing with each step. He was fast, faster than I expected, and he knew the terrain better than I did. Within a minute, I'd lost sight of him. I stopped, breathing hard, and scanned the area with my light. Nothing. Just empty desert stretching in every direction. Behind me, I could see the flashing lights of patrol cars pulling up to the scene, officers spilling out and moving toward my position. But out here, in the darkness, I was alone. That's when I heard it. A sound like metal scraping against rock, coming from somewhere to my right. I turned toward it, and that's when I saw them. Wires. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretched across the desert like a massive spider web. They were attached to rocks, dead trees, pieces of old metal debris, creating a network that extended as far as I could see. And suspended from some of those wires, barely visible in the darkness, were shapes that I knew were bodies. I stood there, frozen, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The backup officers reached me a moment later, and I heard someone say my name, but I couldn't respond. I just stood there, looking at all those wires disappearing into the night, knowing that somewhere out there in the darkness, he was watching me. Waiting. And he was right. This wasn't over. It was never going to be over. I've been a state trooper in Navajo County for 8 years, and I can tell you that the backroads up here are a different world from the highways down south. Most people think of Arizona and picture Phoenix or Tucson, all that urban sprawl and desert heat. But up here in the northeast corner of the state, you've got pine forests, red rock canyons, and stretches of road so remote that you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. The population is sparse, mostly ranchers and farmers who've been working the same land for generations, plus the Navajo Nation communities scattered throughout the region. It's beautiful country, but it's also isolated, and isolation breeds its own kind of darkness. My name is Wes Calloway, and I work out of the Holbrook Station, covering a patrol zone that stretches from the petrified forest all the way up to the Utah border. It's a massive area, over 3,000 square miles of high desert, mesas, and winding 2-lane roads that barely show up on GPS. Most of my shifts are quiet. I spend my nights checking on closed businesses, pulling over the occasional speeder, and making welfare checks on elderly residents who live miles from their nearest neighbor. It's the kind of work where you learn people's names, where they keep their spare keys, and which roads turn to mud when it rains. What I'm about to tell you happened in early October of 2023, during one of those cool autumn nights when the temperature drops fast after sunset, and the air smells like juniper and rain. I was 4 hours into my shift, driving north on Highway 191 toward the small community of Ganado, when my radio crackled with a call from dispatch. Unit 403, this is dispatch. We've received a landline call from a residence on County Road 7240, approximately 12 miles east of Ganado. Caller reported a possible trespasser on the property. Elderly couple requesting assistance. Can you respond? I clicked the radio. Copy that, dispatch. I'm about 20 minutes out. Do we have any additional information on the caller? Residence is registered to Gideon Cray, age 76. He and his wife have lived there for over 40 years. No history of false calls or complaints. Caller sounded distressed but coherent. 10-4, en route. I knew the general area she was talking about. County Road 7240 was one of those unpaved tracks that branched off the main highway and wound through BLM land and private ranches. It was the kind of road that disappeared in heavy rain and required 4-wheel drive half the year. I'd been out that way a few times over the years, mostly for welfare checks on older residents who'd called in to report power outages or medical issues. But I'd never been to Gideon Cray's property specifically. As I turned off the highway onto County Road 7240, my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow dirt road lined with the scrub oak and juniper trees. The road was rough, full of potholes and loose rocks, and my cruiser bounced and swayed as I navigated around the worst sections. There were no other vehicles, no lights from nearby houses, just the empty road stretching ahead into the night. After about 15 minutes, I saw a mailbox appear in my headlights, leaning at an angle with the name Cray painted on the side in faded letters. I turned onto a long driveway that led toward a small house set back from the road. It was an older structure, single-story with a pitched roof and a covered porch across the front. There were lights on inside, warm yellow rectangles glowing against the darkness, and an old pickup truck parked near the side of the house. I pulled up in front of the porch and put my cruiser in park, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. Before I could step out, the front door opened and an elderly man appeared, silhouetted against the light from inside. He was tall but stooped, wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt, and he raised one hand in a tentative wave. I stepped out of the cruiser and walked toward him, my hand resting near my sidearm out of habit. "Mr. Cray, I'm Trooper Calloway with the Highway Patrol. I got a call about a possible trespasser on your property." He nodded quickly, his face deeply lined and his eyes shadowed with worry. "Thank you for coming, officer. I know it's late, but we didn't know what else to do. She's been out there for hours and we can't get her to leave." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Who's been out there, sir?" He gestured vaguely towards the back of the property. "There's a woman standing in our field, just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. My wife spotted her around sunset, and she's been there ever since. We tried calling out to her, tried to see if she needed help, but she won't respond. We're getting worried something's wrong with her." I followed his gaze toward the back of the house, but from where I was standing, I couldn't see anything except darkness and the vague shapes of trees. "How far out is she?" "Maybe 100 yards, just past the old barn. You can see her if you walk around to the back. She's wearing something white, stands out against the dark." I nodded and pulled out my flashlight. "Okay, Mr. Cray, I'm going to go check it out. I need you to stay here on the porch, all right? If this person is in distress or potentially dangerous, I don't want you or your wife getting hurt." "Of course. Thank you, officer." I walked around the side of the house, using my flashlight to navigate past an old propane tank and a stack of firewood covered with a tarp. The backyard opened up into what looked like a small pasture, maybe an acre or two, bordered by a sagging barbed wire fence and scattered with clumps of sagebrush. There was a barn about 50 yards out, an old wooden structure with a collapsed roof and walls that looked like they were barely standing. I swept my flashlight across the field, and that's when I saw her. About 100 yards away, just like Gideon had said, there was a woman standing completely still. She was wearing what looked like a white dress or nightgown, and her long dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. She was facing away from me, toward the tree line at the far edge of the property. "Ma'am," I called out, walking slowly in her direction. "This is the Highway Patrol. Are you all right?" She didn't respond, didn't move. I kept walking, my boots crunching on the dry grass and loose rocks. As I got closer, I could see more details. She was barefoot, her feet pale against the dark ground. Her arms were hanging at her sides, completely relaxed, and her head was tilted slightly forward like she was looking at something on the ground. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I need you to respond if you can." Still nothing. I was about 20 feet away now, close enough to see that she was young, maybe in her 20s or early 30s. Her dress was thin and dirty, stained with what looked like mud or dried blood around the hem. I circled around to get a better angle, keeping my distance, and that's when I saw her face. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Her mouth was slightly parted, and there was a dark bruise on her left cheek that looked a few days old. She wasn't blinking, wasn't breathing. I stepped closer and reached out to touch her shoulder gently at first, and then I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't a real person. It was a mannequin. I backed up quickly, my heart racing. The thing was positioned so carefully, planted in the ground at just the right angle to look like a person standing there. Someone had dressed it, styled the wig, even painted bruises on its face to make it look injured. I swept my flashlight around the field, looking for whoever had done this, but there was no one else visible. I clicked my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 403. The reported trespasser is not a person, it's a mannequin, dressed to look like a woman. Someone placed it on the property deliberately. I'm going to continue searching the area." The dispatcher's voice came back, confusion evident in her tone. "Copy that, 403. Do you need backup?" "Negative, not at this time. Stand by." I walked back toward the house, keeping my flashlight moving across the yard and the surrounding trees. Gideon was still standing on the porch, and when he saw me approaching, he stepped down to meet me halfway. "What did you find?" he asked. "Mr. Cray, that's not a real person out there. It's a mannequin that someone dressed up to look like a woman. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Any disputes with neighbors? Any issues with trespassers before?" His face went pale, and he gripped the porch railing for support. "A mannequin? Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look realistic. Have you or your wife seen anyone on the property recently? Any vehicles you didn't recognize?" He shook his head slowly, his eyes distant. "No, we haven't had visitors in weeks. We keep to ourselves out here." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "But there's something you should know, officer. Something I probably should have mentioned when I called." I waited, my instincts telling me that whatever he was about to say was important. "My wife, Inez, she's been seeing things lately. Ever since her sister disappeared 30 years ago, she's had these episodes where she thinks she sees her standing in that exact spot. The doctors say it's grief, trauma, something like that. I thought maybe tonight was just another one of those episodes, but when I looked out the window, I saw it too. I thought it was real." A chill ran down my spine. "Mr. Cray, where's your wife right now?" "She's inside, resting. She got so upset when she saw the woman out there that I had to give her some of her medication to calm down. I'd like to speak with her, if that's all right." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Follow me." I followed him into the house, and immediately I was struck by how old everything looked. The furniture was from another era, heavy and dark, and the walls were covered with faded photographs in mismatched frames. There was a smell in the air, something musty and stale, like a house that hadn't been properly aired out in years. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner, and sitting in an armchair near the window was an elderly woman. Inez Cray looked frail, her white hair pulled back in a bun and her hands folded in her lap. She was staring out the window toward the field, even though from where she sat she couldn't possibly see the mannequin anymore. When I entered the room, she didn't turn to look at me. "Mrs. Cray?" I said gently. "I'm Trooper Calloway. I just wanted to ask you a few questions about what you saw tonight." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were wet with tears. "She came back," she whispered. "After all these years, she came back." I knelt down next to her chair so we were at eye level. "Mrs. Cray, can you tell me who you think you saw?" "My sister, Marla. She disappeared in 1983, right around this time of year. October 14th, she was driving home from work, taking the back roads like she always did, and she never made it. They found her car 2 days later, abandoned on a dirt road about 5 miles from here, but they never found her." My mind was racing. The name was familiar. Marla. I'd seen missing person cases from that era during training, cold cases that had never been solved. Mrs. Cray, I need to ask you something. Has anyone else been on your property recently? Anyone asking questions about your sister or about the house? Gideon answered for her. No one's been here. Like I said, we keep to ourselves. The only people who come out this far are ranchers and the occasional lost tourist. I stood up and looked around the room, my eyes settling on one of the photographs on the wall. It showed two young women standing in front of this very house smiling at the camera. One of them looked like a younger version of Inez. The other had long dark hair and was wearing a white dress. Is that your sister? I asked, pointing to the photograph. Inez nodded. That was taken the summer before she disappeared. That was her favorite dress. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The mannequin outside was wearing a white dress and had long, dark hair. Someone had recreated that photograph down to the smallest detail. Mr. and Mrs. Cray, I think someone is targeting you specifically. This isn't random. Someone knows about your sister's disappearance and is using it to frighten you. I'm going to call for additional units to search the property, and I need you both to stay inside with the doors locked until we're finished. Gideon's face was grim. You think whoever did this is still out there? I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. I stepped back outside and called for backup, requesting 2 additional units and a K-9 team if available. While I waited, I walked around the perimeter of the house, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. The night was quiet except for the sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant call of a coyote. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. There was a second set of tire tracks in the driveway, faint but visible in the dirt. They led from the road up to the side of the house, then back out again. Fresh tracks, probably made within the last few hours. Someone had been here tonight. I followed the tracks to where they disappeared back onto County Road 7240, and that's when I saw it. Hanging from a tree branch about 20 yards down the road was another mannequin. This one was smaller, like a child, and it was suspended by a rope tied around its neck. It swayed slightly in the breeze, and in the beam of my flashlight I could see that someone had painted tears on its face. I stood there staring at that child mannequin swaying from the tree branch, my flashlight beam fixed on those painted tears, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a prank. This was deliberate, calculated, designed to terrorize. Someone had spent time planning this, researching the Cray family, learning about Marla's disappearance, and then staging these mannequins to inflict maximum psychological damage. I clicked my radio. Dispatch, Unit 403. I found a second mannequin on the property. This one suspended from a tree near the road. Requesting immediate backup and a crime scene unit. This is now an active investigation. Copy that, 403. Nearest unit is 25 minutes out. Holbrook PD is also responding. Be advised, K-9 unit is unavailable tonight due to training exercises in Flagstaff. Understood. I'm securing the scene and returning to the residence to ensure the homeowners are safe. I took several photographs of the hanging mannequin with my phone, documenting the position, the rope, the way it had been dressed in what looked like a child's clothing from decades ago. Then I walked quickly back toward the house, constantly scanning the darkness around me. Whoever had done this could still be out here, watching from the tree line or hiding in the old barn. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me tense. When I reached the front porch, Gideon was standing in the doorway, his face drawn with worry. What did you find out there? I didn't want to alarm him more than necessary, but he deserved to know. Mr. Cray, there's another mannequin hanging from a tree down the road. I need you and your wife to stay inside and away from the windows. Lock all the doors and don't open them for anyone except uniformed officers. Backup is on the way. His hand gripped the door frame. Another one? Why would someone do this to us? That's what I'm going to find out. But right now, I need to make sure you're both safe. I paused, weighing my next question carefully. Mr. Cray, when Marla disappeared in '93, was there ever any indication of who might have been responsible? Any suspects? Any persons of interest? He shook his head slowly. The police investigated for months. They interviewed everyone who knew her, checked all her friends, her co-workers, even people she'd dated years before, but they never found anything. It was like she just vanished into thin air. Inez never got over it. She kept hoping Marla would come back, kept looking for her in every woman she saw on the street. It nearly destroyed her. And there was never anyone who showed unusual interest in the case? No one who kept asking questions or coming around? Not that I remember. It's been 30 years, officer. Most people have forgotten about Marla by now. His voice cracked slightly. Everyone except Inez. I heard a sound from inside the house. A soft cry, followed by Gideon's name being called. He turned quickly. That's Inez. I need to go to her. Go ahead. I'll be right out here. He disappeared inside, and I stood on the porch, listening to the night. The wind had picked up, making the juniper trees rustle and sending dust skittering across the driveway. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of headlights approaching on County Road 7240. Backup was arriving. 2 patrol cars pulled up within minutes of each other, followed by an unmarked sedan. I recognized the first officer out of the lead patrol car, Sergeant Vance from the Phoenix Division. He'd been transferred up north a few months ago to help coordinate multi-jurisdictional cases. We'd worked together on a few calls, and I respected his experience. Calloway, he said, walking over with his flashlight in hand. Dispatch said you've got mannequins staged on private property? 2 of them that I've found so far. One dressed like the homeowner's sister who disappeared in 1993, positioned in the back field. Another one looks like a child, hanging from a tree down the road. Both placed here within the last few hours based on the tire tracks I found. Vance's expression darkened. Show me. I walked him through what I'd discovered, starting with the mannequin in the field and then leading him down the road to the one hanging from the tree. He examined both scenes carefully, taking his own photographs and making notes. When we returned to the house, he called the other officers over for a briefing. All right, here's what we're doing. I want a perimeter search of the entire property, 200 yards in every direction. Look for any other staged items, any evidence of someone hiding or watching. Officer Dennison, you take the west side. Officer Keller, you've got the east. I'll coordinate with Calloway to interview the homeowners and search the residence. Radio in every 15 minutes with status updates. The officers dispersed, and Vance turned to me. You said the woman in the field was dressed like the homeowner's sister, like she looked when she disappeared. According to a photograph inside the house, yes. White dress, long dark hair. Even the bruising on the face matches what Mrs. Cray described from one of the last times she saw her sister. Someone did their research. Vance looked toward the house. I want to talk to both of them. There's more going on here than harassment. This feels personal. We walked up to the front door, and I knocked gently. Gideon answered almost immediately, his eyes red-rimmed. Come in, officers. Inez is in the bedroom. She's very upset. The interior of the house looked different in the presence of another officer. Less like a time capsule, and more like a crime scene waiting to be processed. Vance's eyes swept across the photographs on the walls, the old furniture, the faded curtains that looked like they hadn't been changed in decades. Mr. Cray, I'm Sergeant Vance with the Highway Patrol. I need to ask you some questions about your sister-in-law's disappearance. Is there somewhere we can sit down? Gideon led us to a small dining room table covered with a lace tablecloth. We sat, and Vance pulled out a notebook. "Tell me about the night Marla disappeared. Everything you remember." Gideon took a deep breath. It was October 14th, 1993. Marla had been living with us for about 6 months at that point. She'd gone through a bad divorce and needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. She was working at a hospital in Winslow, about 45 miles from here, doing night shifts as a nurse. That night, she left for work around 6 p.m., said she'd be back the next morning like always, but she never came home. What time was she supposed to return? Around 8 a.m., when she wasn't back by 10, Inez started calling the hospital. They said Marla had finished her shift on time and left around 7:30 a.m., so somewhere between Winslow and here she disappeared. Vance made notes. And her car was found 2 days later? Yes, on a dirt road about 5 miles east of here. Doors were locked, keys in the ignition, her purse still on the passenger seat. No signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing, just abandoned. Did the investigators have any theories about what happened? Gideon's hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. They thought maybe she'd gotten lost, wandered off and succumbed to exposure. Or maybe she'd been picked up by someone passing through. But they searched for weeks and never found any trace of her. Eventually, the case went cold. Vance looked up from his notes. "Mr. Cray, in all the years since Marla disappeared, has anyone ever contacted you claiming to have information about what happened to her? Any strange phone calls, letters, visitors?" "No, nothing like that." "What about recently? Any unusual activity around the property in the last few weeks or months?" Gideon thought for a moment. "Well, there was someone who came by about a month ago. A woman said she was writing a book about unsolved missing persons cases in Arizona. She wanted to interview Inez about Marla. I told her no, that Inez wasn't up for it, and she left. But she seemed disappointed, like she really wanted to talk to us." Vance and I exchanged a glance. "Do you remember this woman's name? She gave me a business card. Let me see if I still have it." Gideon stood and walked over to a drawer in the kitchen, rummaging through papers and old receipts. After a moment, he pulled out a white business card and handed it to Vance. The card was simple, just a name and phone number printed in black ink. Sarah Jennison, true crime researcher. No address, no website, just those basic details. Vance photographed the card with his phone and handed it back to Gideon. "Did she say anything else? Mention where she was from, or how she'd heard about Marla's case?" "She said she'd been researching cold cases in northern Arizona and came across the police reports from 983. Said she thought Marla's story deserved to be told, but honestly, I didn't want to hear it. We've spent 30 years trying to move on, and dredging it all up again seemed cruel." I felt a chill run down my spine. Jennison. The same last name as Marla Jennison, one of the victims from my colleague's case in Phoenix. It could be a coincidence, but my instincts were screaming that it wasn't. I made a mental note to run the name through our database as soon as I had access to a computer. Vance stood. "Mr. Cray, I'd like to check on your wife if that's all right. And then I need to do a walkthrough of the house, just to make sure there's nothing out of place." "Of course. She's in the bedroom. First door on the right down the hall." We walked down a narrow hallway lined with more photographs, most of them faded and yellowed with age. Vance knocked gently on the bedroom door. "Mrs. Cray, this is Sergeant Vance with the Highway Patrol. May I come in?" There was a long pause, and then a weak voice said, "Yes." We entered the bedroom, and I was immediately struck by how different it felt from the rest of the house. Where the other rooms were cluttered with decades of accumulated possessions, this room was almost bare. A simple bed, a dresser, a single chair by the window, and on every available surface, There were photographs of Marla. Not old photographs from 1993, but the same photograph repeated over and over, printed in different sizes and placed in different frames. The image of Marla in her white dress, standing in front of the house. Inez was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked up at us with hollow eyes. "She came back to punish me," she whispered. Vance moved closer, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Cray, why do you think your sister would want to punish you?" Tears began to stream down her face. "Because it's my fault she disappeared. I should have told someone. I should have said something when I had the chance." I felt my pulse quicken. "Mrs. Cray, what should you have told someone?" She looked at Gideon, who was standing in the doorway, with a confused expression. Then she looked back at us. "Marla didn't disappear on her way home from work. She never made it to work that night. She left here around 6 p.m., but she came back an hour later. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her come in through the back door. I thought she'd forgotten something." Gideon's face went pale. "Inez, what are you saying? You never told the police this." "I couldn't. I was too afraid." She stood up, wringing her hands. "I heard voices in the kitchen. Marla was arguing with someone, a man. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but she sounded angry, scared. I went to check on her, but when I got to the kitchen, it was empty. The back door was open and I could see car headlights pulling away down the driveway. I thought maybe she'd left with whoever it was, that she'd be back later. But she never came back." Vance's expression was serious. "Mrs. Cray, did you see who the man was? Did you recognize the voice?" She shook her head. "It was too dark, and I was too far away. But I know the car wasn't hers. It was bigger, like a truck or SUV, and when it drove away I saw something in the back window. It looked like Marla's white dress. Why didn't you tell the police this when they were investigating?" Inez's voice broke. "Because Gideon was away that night. He was at a cattle auction in Flagstaff, didn't get home until the next morning. If I'd told the police that Marla came back here and left with someone, they would have asked where I was, why I didn't stop her, why I didn't call for help. I was scared they'd think I had something to do with it. So I said nothing. And I've lived with that guilt every day for 30 years." The room was silent, except for the sound of Inez crying. Gideon stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. Vance looked at me, and I could see the same question in his eyes that was running through my mind. If Marla had come back to the house that night and left with someone, then her disappearance wasn't random. It was planned. Vance pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Cray, I need you to come down to the station tomorrow and make a formal statement. Every detail you remember, no matter how small. This case isn't cold anymore. Someone out there knows what happened to Marla, and they're using that knowledge to target you." Just then, my radio crackled. "Unit 403, this is Officer Dennison. I found something on the west side of the property. You need to see this." Vance and I exchanged a look. "Copy that, we're on our way." We left Gideon and Inez in the bedroom and walked quickly through the house and out into the night. Officer Dennison was just waiting near the old barn. His flashlight pointed at something on the ground. As we approached, I could see what he'd found. It was a shallow depression in the earth, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Fresh dirt had been piled next to it, and there was a wooden cross staked into the ground at one end. Carved into the cross in crude letters was a single name, Marla. The grave sat there in the beam of our flashlights, the wooden cross casting a long shadow across the freshly turned earth. I stood at the edge of the depression, trying to process what we were looking at. Someone had dug this recently, within the last day or two, based on how fresh the soil looked. But why? To terrorize the Crays even further? Or was there something actually buried here? Vance crouched down and examined the disturbed earth without touching it. "Dennison, how far out were you when you found this?" "About 150 yards from the house, sir. West side of the property, just past that old fence line. I almost missed it in the dark, but my flashlight caught the cross." "Any other signs of activity? Footprints? Tire tracks?" "Negative. Ground's too hard and rocky out here to leave clear prints, but whoever dug this knew the property. They picked a spot that's not visible from the house." Vance stood and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling this in. We need forensics out here, and we need to secure this entire area as a crime scene. Calloway, I want you to go back to the house and make sure the Crays don't leave. Get detailed statements from both of them about everything that happened in '93 and find out if they knew about this spot on their property." "You think there's a body down there?" I asked. "I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. If this is Marla's actual grave, then we're looking at a 30-year-old homicide. And if it's not, then someone went to a lot of trouble to make us think it is." I walked back toward the house, my mind racing. The timeline was becoming clearer now. Marla had left for work, come back an hour later with an unknown man, argued with him, and then left in his vehicle. Inez had seen the white dress in the back window of the car. And now, 3 decades later, someone had staged mannequins wearing that same dress and dug a grave with Marla's name on it. This wasn't random harassment. This was someone who knew exactly what had happened that night. When I reached the house, Gideon was standing on the porch, his arms wrapped around himself despite the mild temperature. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. "What did you find out there?" I chose my words carefully. "Mr. Cray, we found a grave marker with your sister-in-law's name on it. We're going to need to excavate the site, which means this property is now an active crime scene. I need you and Mrs. Cray to pack some essentials. You'll need to stay somewhere else tonight while we process everything." His face crumpled. "A grave? You think Marla's been here all along, on our property?" "We don't know yet, but we need to investigate thoroughly. Is there anyone you can stay with, family, friends? We have a daughter in Holbrook. I can call her." He paused, his voice breaking. All these years, Inez kept saying she felt like Marla was still close by. I thought it was just grief talking, but what if she was right? What if Marla's been here the whole time? "Mr. Cray, I need to ask you something. That spot where the grave was found, did you or Inez ever use that area for anything? Storage, animals, anything that would require digging?" "No, that's just empty land back there. We stopped using the west pasture years ago when the fence started falling apart. I can't remember the last time either of us went out that far." I made notes and then went inside to check on Inez. She was still in the bedroom, but now she was standing at the window, staring out at the darkness. When I entered, she didn't turn around. "Mrs. Cray, we need to move you and your husband to a safe location for the night. Can I help you pack a bag?" "He's been here all along, hasn't he?" she said quietly. "Whoever took Marla, he's been watching us, waiting. That's why the mannequins. That's why the grave. He wants us to know what he did." "Mrs. Cray, do you have any idea who the man was that night? Anyone Marla might have been involved with? Anyone who had reason to hurt her?" She finally turned to face me, and her eyes were distant, like she was looking at something only she could see. "There was someone. A man Marla had dated briefly before she moved in with us. His name was Thomas Reddick. They'd only been together a few months, but when she ended things, he didn't take it well. He kept calling, showing up at her work, following her. She got a restraining order, but that only made him angrier." I felt my stomach drop. Reddick, the same last name as Officer Thatcher Reddick from the Phoenix case. It had to be a coincidence. Reddick wasn't an uncommon surname in Arizona. But the timing, the methodology, the way both cases involved staged crime scenes and psychological torture, it was too similar to ignore. Did the police ever question Thomas about Marla's disappearance? They tried to, but he'd left the state by the time they started investigating. Moved to California, or so we heard. They tracked him down eventually, but he had an alibi for the night Marla disappeared. Said he was at work in Flagstaff. His employer confirmed it, so they cleared him. Do you know if he ever came back to Arizona? I don't know. We never heard from him again after that. It's been 30 years. I needed to run this name through the database immediately, but first I had to make sure the Krays were safe. I helped Inez pack a small bag while Gideon called their daughter. Within 30 minutes, a younger woman arrived in a sedan, her face etched with worry. She introduced herself as Rebecca Holleran and said she'd take her parents back to her place in Holbrook. After they left, I walked back out to the gravesite. The area was now surrounded by police tape, and portable lights had been set up, illuminating the scene in harsh white light. A forensic team had arrived and was carefully photographing the grave from every angle. Vance was standing off to the side, talking on his phone. When he saw me approaching, he ended the call. Crime scene unit is going to start excavating in about 20 minutes. I've also contacted the state medical examiner's office. If there's a body down there, we'll know soon enough. He looked at me. You learn anything new from the Krays? I told him about Thomas Reddick, about the relationship with Marla, the restraining order, and the alibi that had cleared him in '93. Vance's expression darkened as I spoke. Reddick. Same last name as the officer in Phoenix who's been dealing with the staged bodies on Route 85. I know. I thought the same thing. Could be a coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Not with cases like this. Vance pulled out his phone. I'm going to run Thomas Reddick through every database we have access to. If he's still alive, if he's back in Arizona, we need to know. While Vance made calls, I watched the forensic team work. They were using small hand tools now, carefully removing layers of soil from the depression. The process was slow and methodical, and I found myself holding my breath every time they stopped to examine something. About 40 minutes later, one of the techs called out, "We've got something." Everyone moved closer. The tech was kneeling at the edge of the grave, shining a light into the hole they'd excavated. I could see fabric, white and dirty, partially exposed in the soil. The tech used a small brush to carefully clear away more dirt, revealing more of the material. It was a dress, a white dress. Vance stepped forward. "Can you tell if there's remains underneath?" The tech continued working, moving with painstaking care. After several minutes, they looked up. "There's definitely something here. Could be skeletal remains, but I need more time to confirm. The soil's been disturbed recently, but there's a layer underneath that looks much older, more compacted. Whatever this is, it's been here a long time." My radio crackled. "Unit 403, this is dispatch. I have Sergeant Vance's database request results. Is he available?" Vance took the radio from me. "This is Vance. Go ahead." "Sir, Thomas Reddick, age 54, last known address in Phoenix, Arizona. He moved back to the state 3 years ago after living in California for 27 years. Current employment is listed as independent contractor. No recent criminal record, but there are several concerning reports. 2 restraining orders filed against him in the last 5 years by different women, both citing harassment and stalking behavior. Neither case went to prosecution." "Do we have a current address?" "Negative. The Phoenix address on file is for an apartment complex, but the manager says he moved out 6 months ago. No forwarding address provided." Vance's jaw tightened. "Put out a bolo for Thomas Reddick. White male, age 54, last seen in Phoenix area. Consider him a person of interest in an active homicide investigation. I want to know if anyone spots him, and I want units to check any known associates or previous addresses. Copy that, sir. Bolo is going out now. Vance handed me back the radio and ran a hand through his hair. He's back in Arizona. He's been stalking women, and he disappeared 6 months ago, right around the time these mannequins and staged scenes started appearing. You think he's been planning this? Waiting for the right time to come back here? I think he's been obsessed with Marla for 30 years, and now he's making his move. The question is, why now? What triggered this? One of the forensic techs approached us. Sergeant, we've uncovered enough to confirm. There are skeletal remains in the grave. Female, based on the pelvic structure. We're going to need to fully excavate before we can make any definitive identifications. But given the location and the circumstances, it's highly likely this is Marla. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. All those years, Inez had been right. Her sister had been close by, buried on the property she and Gideon had called home. How long until you can confirm identity? We'll need to transport the remains to the medical examiner's office, probably 24 to 48 hours for a preliminary report. Dental records will help if they're available. DNA will take longer. Vance nodded. Process everything. I want every piece of evidence documented and preserved. This case is 30 years old, but it's active again now. As the team continued their work, I walked back toward my cruiser. Dawn was starting to break on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I'd been awake for almost 12 hours, and exhaustion was starting to set in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my blood run cold. It was a photograph taken from a distance, showing me standing next to my patrol car at the Cray property. Below the image was a single sentence, "You're getting closer, Trooper Calloway." I showed the message to Vance immediately. He examined my phone, his expression grim. He's been here tonight, watching us work, and now he knows who you are. How did he get my number? Phone numbers aren't hard to find if you know where to look. The real question is what he wants. Why reach out now? I thought about the mannequins, the grave, the elaborate staging of everything. He wants an audience. He's been invisible for 30 years, and now he wants someone to witness what he's done. He wants credit. Then we use that. We make him think he's in control, that we're following his lead. And when he gets confident enough to make a mistake, we grab him. Another text came through. This one contained just an address. 2847 County Road 9, Concho, Arizona, followed by the words, "She's waiting for you." Vance looked up the address on his phone. Concho's about 40 miles south of here. Rural area, mostly ranches and empty land. You think it's a trap? Definitely. But we don't have a choice. If there's another victim, we have to respond. He called over 2 of the officers. Dennison, Keller, you're coming with us. Calloway, you're driving. I'll coordinate with the Apache County Sheriff's Office to have deputies meet us there. We loaded into 2 patrol cars and headed south as the sun fully broke over the horizon. The drive took almost an hour, the highway giving way to increasingly remote dirt roads. When we reached the address, we found an old homestead that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The house was barely standing, its roof collapsed and windows broken. There was a rusted truck parked nearby, its tires flat and body eaten through with corrosion. We approached carefully, weapons drawn, clearing each room of the house. It was empty except for debris and animal nests. But in the back bedroom, we found something that made my skin crawl. Another mannequin, this one positioned in a chair facing the window. It was dressed in a highway patrol uniform, and pinned to its chest was a name tag that read Calloway. On the floor, in front of the mannequin, was a manila envelope. Vance picked it up carefully with gloved hands and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of me at work, at home, at the grocery store, at the gas station. Thomas Reddick had been following me for weeks, maybe months, documenting my every move. And underneath the photographs was a handwritten note. "The game has just begun, trooper. Let's see if you're as good at finding the living as you are at finding the dead." The photograph spread across the table in front of me felt like a violation. There I was, pumping gas at the station in Holbrook, walking out of the grocery store with a bag in my hand, sitting in my patrol car during a lunch break. Each image was time-stamped, going back almost 4 months. Thomas Reddick had been watching me since June, long before the Crays had called about the mannequin in their field. This wasn't spontaneous. This was methodical, patient, obsessive. Vance stood beside me, his face grim as he examined the evidence. He's been planning this for months, which means everything that happened at the Cray property was just the beginning. He wanted us to find Marla's body. He wanted to drag this whole thing back into the light. "But why target me specifically?" I asked. "I wasn't even a cop in 1993. I had nothing to do with the original investigation. You work the same roads he used to disappear Marla on. You patrol the area where he buried her. In his mind, you've taken over the territory that used to be his hunting ground. He sees you as an obstacle, or maybe as a worthy opponent." Vance pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm requesting protective surveillance on you starting immediately. You don't go anywhere alone until we catch this guy." "What about the Crays? They're vulnerable too." "Already arranged. Holbrook PD is posting officers at Rebecca Holleran's house. Nobody gets near that family without going through law enforcement first." One of the forensic techs called from the other room. "Sergeant, we found something else." We walked into what used to be the kitchen of the abandoned homestead. The tech was standing near an old wood-burning stove, pointing at something carved into the wall. It was a message, scratched into the plaster with something sharp. "Octa 14, 93. The day I became invisible. Octa 14, 2023. The day I return." I felt my stomach turn. October 14th, that's in 3 days. Vance pulled out his phone and started making calls. "We need to set up a task force. Every officer in Navajo and Apache counties needs to be briefed. I want checkpoints on every major road, surveillance on the Cray property, and eyes on anyone matching Reddick's description." He's given us a timeline. We know when he's planning to make his move. Over the next 72 hours, the investigation consumed everything. The medical examiner confirmed that the remains found at the Cray property were indeed Marla's, and that she'd been dead for approximately 30 years. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull. Someone had killed her and buried her on her own sister's property, where she'd remained hidden for 3 decades. Thomas Reddick's face was plastered across every news station in northern Arizona. Tips started coming in almost immediately. Someone thought they saw him at a gas station in Show Low. Another caller reported a man matching his description at a motel in Winslow. But every lead turned out to be nothing. He was a ghost, moving through the landscape without leaving a trace. I spent those 3 days under constant surveillance. 2 officers followed me everywhere, even to my apartment at night. I should have felt safer, but instead I felt like prey, waiting for the predator to strike. Every car that passed seemed suspicious. Every face in a crowd could have been him. On the morning of October 14th, I reported for duty at the Holbrook station at 6 a.m. Vance was already there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He'd set up a command center in the conference room, with maps of the county spread across the tables and a dozen officers coordinating patrols and checkpoints. We've got units positioned at every major intersection within 50 miles of the Cray property, he briefed us. Air support is standing by if we get a confirmed sighting. The Crays are secure at Rebecca's house with armed officers posted outside. Calloway, I want you in the field today, but you're not working alone. Officer Dennison will be riding with you, and you'll be checking in every 30 minutes. What's our patrol area? County Road 7240 and all the back roads within a 10-mile radius. If Reddick is planning something at the Cray property, that's where he'll be. I want you visible. I want you obvious. Let him see you. But the moment you spot him, you call for backup and you do not engage alone. Understood? Yes, sir. Dennison and I spent the morning driving the back roads, checking abandoned homesteads and remote properties. The landscape looked different in daylight. Less threatening, but somehow more exposed. Every time we rounded a curve or crested a hill, I expected to see Thomas Reddick standing there, waiting. But the roads remained empty. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. Did you like my gift at the homestead? I have more to show you. Go to the place where it all began. I showed the message to Dennison, who immediately radioed it in. Vance's voice came back within seconds. The place where it all began. That has to be the Cray property. We've got officers there, but I want you to respond as well. Do not enter any structures alone. Wait for backup. We drove to the Cray property, where 2 patrol cars were already parked in the driveway. The officers had done a perimeter check and found nothing unusual. The house was locked and empty, just as it had been since the family left 3 days ago. Check the barn, I said. That's where Inez said she heard Marla and Thomas arguing. We approached the old structure carefully. The door was hanging open, creaking slightly in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Old farming equipment sat rusting in the corners, and the floor was littered with broken boards and debris. Dennison swept his flashlight across the interior. Nothing here, just junk. But something felt wrong. I walked deeper into the barn, examining the walls, the floor, looking for anything out of place. That's when I noticed it. One section of the dirt floor looked different, darker, like it had been recently disturbed. I knelt down and brushed away the loose soil. There was fabric underneath, blue fabric, like denim. I stood up quickly and called Vance. We've got something at the barn. Looks like there might be another burial site. Within 20 minutes, the forensic team was back, carefully excavating the new discovery. What they found made my blood run cold. It wasn't skeletal remains this time. It was fresh. A man's body, maybe dead for a few days at most, buried in a shallow grave beneath the barn floor. The medical examiner arrived and did a preliminary examination. Male, approximately 50 to 60 years old, cause of death appears to be strangulation. Based on body temperature and decomposition, I'd say he's been dead less than 72 hours. Vance stood over the grave, his expression dark. Who is he? One of the techs checked the man's pockets and found a wallet. He opened it carefully and read the driver's license. Thomas Reddick, Phoenix address. The words didn't make sense at first. Thomas Reddick was dead? Then who had been sending the messages? Who had staged all the mannequins? Vance's phone rang, and he stepped away to take the call. When he came back, his face was pale. That was Rebecca Holleran. Her parents are missing. She went to check on them an hour ago, and the house was empty. No signs of struggle, but both Gideon and Inez are gone. The officers posted outside said they never saw anyone enter or leave. My mind raced. If Reddick's been dead for days, then someone else took the craze. Someone who's been using his identity. Or someone who was working with him. Vance pulled out his phone and called a dispatch. I need all available units searching for Gideon and Inez Cray, last seen at 2847 Maple Street in Holbrook. Consider this an active kidnapping. Another text came through on my phone. This time it included a photograph. It showed Gideon and Inez sitting in what looked like the back of a vehicle, both of them bound and gagged. Below the image, they've been carrying guilt for 30 years. Now they'll carry the truth. Come to the place where Marla took her last breath. Come alone, or they die. I showed the message to Vance. He wants me to come alone. That's not happening. We'll set up a tactical response team. We don't have time. He'll know if I bring backup. He's been watching us this whole time. Vance grabbed my arm. Calloway, this is exactly what he wants. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. You go in there alone, you're not coming back. Then what do? Let him kill 2 innocent people? We do this smart. You wear a wire, you keep him talking, and we position units close enough to move in when we have a shot, but you do not engage without backup. The message had said, the place where Marla took her last breath. That had to be somewhere on the Cray property. But where? I thought back to Inez's confession. She'd heard Marla arguing with someone in the kitchen, and then she'd seen car headlights pulling away. But if Marla hadn't left the property alive, then she'd died here, somewhere close. The well, I said suddenly. Old properties like this usually had wells for water before they got plumbing. If he killed her here, he would have needed somewhere to hide the body temporarily before burying her. We searched the property and found it behind the barn, an old stone well with a wooden cover that had rotted through in places. When we removed the cover and shined lights down into the darkness, we could see something at the bottom. A ladder, recently placed, leading down into the shaft. Vance set up the tactical team while I put on the wire. We'll be listening to everything. The moment we hear a threat, we're coming in. You keep him talking, you stay alert, and you do not let him get behind you. I started down the ladder into the well. The shaft was deep, maybe 30 feet, and the walls were slick with moisture. At the bottom, I found a narrow tunnel leading away from the main shaft. Someone had dug this out, expanded it into something larger. I followed the tunnel for about 20 yards until it opened into a small chamber. Gideon and Inez were there, tied to chairs in the center of the space. They were both conscious, but terrified. Standing behind them, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure I didn't expect to see. It was Rebecca Halloran. She smiled when she saw me, and in her hand was a knife. "Hello, Trooper Calloway. Thank you for coming. I was worried you might bring friends, but I see you followed instructions." My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. "Rebecca, you're behind this?" "Behind it? I created it. Thomas Reddick was just a tool, a scapegoat. He was obsessed with Marla, sure, but he didn't kill her. I did." Inez let out a muffled sob behind her gag. Rebecca walked over and stroked her mother's hair almost tenderly. "I was 8 years old when Aunt Marla came to live with us. Such a beautiful woman. Everyone loved her, especially my father. He spent more time with her than he did with me or Mom. I watched them together, saw how he looked at her. And that night, October 14th, 1993, I heard them arguing in the kitchen. She was telling him it had to stop, that what they were doing was wrong. Gideon's eyes were wide with horror, trying to shake his head. Rebecca laughed. "Oh, don't worry, Father. I'm not saying you killed her. You just broke her heart. She ran out to the barn, crying, and I followed her. I was so angry. Angry at her for taking my father's attention, angry at him for loving her more than me. There was a shovel in the barn. It was easy. One swing, and she fell. She didn't even scream. She walked back toward me, still holding the knife. I hid her in the well that night. No one thought to look there." And years later, when I was older and stronger, I moved her body to that spot in the west pasture and buried her properly. My parents never knew. They spent 30 years living with guilt, thinking they could have saved her if they'd just acted differently. But the truth is, Marla was already dead before Mom saw those car headlights. Those were my headlights. I drove her car away and abandoned it to make it look like she'd left. And Thomas Reddick? He came back to Arizona 3 years ago, started asking questions about Marla again. I couldn't have that, so I befriended him, made him think we were working together to find the truth. And then, 3 days ago, I killed him and buried him in the barn where it all started. Just like I'm going to kill you, Trooper, and my parents. We'll all disappear, just like Marla did. She raised the knife, and I heard Vance's voice in my earpiece. We're moving in. Keep her talking. Rebecca, there are officers surrounding this property right now. You're not getting out of here. She smiled. I've been planning my exit for months. By the time they find this chamber, I'll be in Mexico. But first, I need to finish what I started. She lunged forward, and everything happened at once. I drew my weapon, but she was faster than I expected. The knife caught my arm, slicing through my uniform. I fired twice, both shots going wide in the confined space. Then the tactical team burst through the tunnel entrance, flashlights and weapons drawn. Rebecca dropped the knife and held up her hands, still smiling. You can't prove any of it. It's all just a story. But the wire had caught everything. Her confession, the details, all of it recorded. They arrested her there in the chamber and brought Gideon and Inez up to the surface. The old couple was traumatized, broken by the revelation that their daughter had killed Inez's sister and had been manipulating them for 30 years. They were taken to the hospital for observation. I spent the next few hours giving statements and being treated for the knife wound. It wasn't deep, just needed a few stitches. By the time I was finished, the sun was setting again, painting the desert in shades of red and orange. Vance found me sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance. You did good work today, Calloway. We got her. Yeah, we got her. But I didn't feel like celebrating. 2 people were dead, a family was destroyed, and 30 years of grief had been caused by a child's jealousy and rage. The Krays are asking for you, Vance said. They're at Holbrook Regional, said they wanted to thank you. I drove to the hospital and found them in a quiet room, sitting together on the bed. They looked smaller somehow, aged by the weight of what they'd learned. When they saw me, Inez started crying again. We didn't know, she whispered. All these years, we didn't know our own daughter was capable of something like that. I didn't know what to say. What comfort could I offer? Their sister was murdered by their child, and they'd lived in the same house with her killer for 3 decades. Gideon reached out and shook my hand. Thank you for finding the truth, Trooper. Even though it hurts, we needed to know. I left the hospital as night fell completely over Navajo County. As I drove back to my apartment, I passed County Road 7240, the turnoff that led to the Kray property. I thought about all those back roads, all those remote houses where people lived their quiet lives, harboring secrets that might never come to light. My phone buzzed one final time. Unknown number. My heart raced as I opened the message. It was a photograph of the abandoned homestead where we'd found Thomas Reddick's body. But in the image, there was someone standing in the doorway. A figure I couldn't quite make out, partially hidden in shadow. Below it, just 2 words, still watching. I pulled over and immediately called Vance. But even as I waited for him to answer, I knew what this meant. Rebecca had been working alone, hadn't she? She'd confessed to everything. So who had taken this photograph? Who was still out there? Vance's voice came through. Calloway, what's wrong? I looked out at the dark desert stretching endlessly in every direction. at all those hidden places where secrets could stay buried for decades. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything." Because the truth was, in a place this vast and isolated, you never really knew what was hiding in the shadows. And sometimes, even when you caught the killer, you couldn't shake the feeling that something else was still out there, watching and waiting. I've been with the Arizona Highway Patrol for 16 years. The last 8 as a sergeant supervising the southern district that covers Interstate 10 between Tucson and the New Mexico border. It's a busy stretch of highway, hundreds of miles of asphalt, cutting through some of the most unforgiving desert in the American Southwest. Most people see I-10 as just a route to get from point A to point B, but for those of us who patrol it, the interstate is its own ecosystem. You get to know the patterns, the usual trouble spots, the places where accidents cluster and where smugglers like to operate. My name is Arlen Vance, and I thought I'd seen everything this highway could throw at me. Multi-vehicle pileups, high-speed chases, human trafficking operations, drug seizures worth millions of dollars. But what happened in November of 2023 made me question everything I thought I knew about this job. It started with a routine call, the kind we get a dozen times a shift, a blown tire on the shoulder of the highway. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested what we were about to walk into. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday when dispatch called it in. I was riding with Officer Dax Halverson, a rookie who'd just finished his probationary period 3 weeks earlier. Dax was 24, fresh out of the academy, and still had that eagerness that most of us lose after our first few years on the job. He was a good kid, followed procedures, asked questions when he didn't understand something. I'd been paired with him to help him learn the route and get comfortable with the highway patrol work. Unit 501, this is dispatch. We've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on I-10 eastbound, mile marker 274. Civilian caller says the vehicle has been sitting on the shoulder for at least 2 hours with a blown tire. No driver visible. Can you respond? I clicked the radio. Copy that, dispatch. We're about 10 minutes out. Any description of the vehicle? Silver sedan. Caller couldn't identify the make or model. Said it looked like it had been there a while. No hazard lights on. 10-4, en route. Mile marker 274 was in one of the more desolate sections between Tucson and Wilcox, where the highway cuts through open desert with nothing but scrub brush and the occasional rest stop for miles in either direction. During the day, you could see for miles in every direction, but at night, the darkness was absolute except for the twin cones of headlights from passing vehicles. Dax drove while I scanned the roadside with our spotlight. Traffic was light for a Tuesday evening, mostly long-haul trucks and a few cars. As we approached mile marker 274, I saw it. A silver Honda Accord sitting on the shoulder, tilted slightly to the right where the rear tire had blown. There was something off about it immediately. The trunk was open, just a few inches, like someone had tried to close it, but it hadn't latched properly. "Pull up behind it," I told Dax. "Angle the cruiser so our headlights illuminate the vehicle. I want clear sight lines before we approach." He did as instructed, positioning our car about 20 feet back. We both stepped out, and I grabbed my flashlight. The November air was cool, and there was a breeze coming from the west that carried the smell of creosote and dust. The highway stretched out in both directions, empty except for a pair of taillights disappearing into the distance. I approached the Honda while Dax hung back by our cruiser, keeping watch. The first thing I noticed was the tire. It wasn't just flat, it was shredded, torn apart like something had ripped through the sidewall with tremendous force. Pieces of rubber were scattered along the shoulder for about 30 feet. Whatever had happened to this tire, it wasn't a normal blowout. I walked around to the driver's side and shined my light through the window. The interior was empty. No personal belongings visible. No phone, no purse or wallet. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the off position. I tried the door handle. Locked. "Dax, come run the plates while I check the trunk." He jogged over with his laptop and started entering the license plate number. I moved to the rear of the vehicle and carefully lifted the trunk lid. It swung open with a creak, and I aimed my flashlight inside. The trunk was mostly empty except for a spare tire, a jack, and what looked like a small overnight bag. But what caught my attention was the lining of the trunk itself. There were dark stains on the carpet, wet and glistening in the beam of my flashlight. I crouched down and touched one of the stains with my gloved finger. It was sticky. I brought my hand up to the light. Blood, fresh blood. "Dax, we've got a problem here. I need you to call for backup and a crime scene unit. We've got blood in the trunk." His eyes widened, but he kept his composure. "Copy that, Sergeant." He headed back to the cruiser to make the calls while I continued examining the vehicle. I looked more carefully at the trunk space, trying to determine how much blood we were dealing with. The stains covered an area about 2 feet square, soaked into the carpet but not pooling. That suggested the source had been removed or had moved on their own. I carefully unzipped the overnight bag and looked inside. Women's clothing, toiletries, a paperback novel. At the bottom of the bag was a wallet. I opened it carefully. Arizona driver's license, credit cards, and about $60 in cash. The license showed a woman named Marla Jennison, age 38, with a Tucson address. The photo showed a woman with short blonde hair and a friendly smile. I photographed the license with my phone and then called it in. "Dispatch, Unit 501. The abandoned vehicle is registered to Marla Jennison, age 38, out of Tucson. I've found blood evidence in the trunk, requesting immediate welfare check at the registered address and all available units to assist with a grid search of the area." The dispatcher's voice came back, professional but tense. "Copy that, 501. Backup is en route, ETA 15 minutes. I'll coordinate the welfare check now." I walked back to where Dax was standing by our cruiser. He looked nervous, which was understandable. This was probably his first potential crime scene. "What do you think happened, Sergeant?" "I don't know yet. Could be a lot of things. Maybe she was injured when the tire blew and someone stopped to help, took her to the hospital. Or maybe something worse." I looked out at the dark desert surrounding us, but that tire bothers me. It didn't just blow out from wear or hitting debris. Something tore it apart. We spent the next 10 minutes securing the scene, setting up flares and tape to mark off the area. 2 more patrol units arrived, followed by a crime scene van. The techs immediately got to work photographing the vehicle and documenting the blood evidence. While they worked, I walked along the shoulder with my flashlight looking for any other evidence. About 40 feet from the Honda, I found something that made my skin crawl. Tire tracks. Fresh ones, leading from the pavement onto the shoulder and then back out again. But these weren't from the Honda. They were wider, deeper, from a much larger vehicle. And the pattern suggested the vehicle had been parked here, right next to where the Honda would have been sitting. I called one of the crime scene techs over. "Document these tracks. I want casts made and sent to the lab for analysis." "You think someone stopped to help and then took her somewhere?" "Maybe. Or someone caused that tire to blow and was waiting for her to pull over." I swept my light across the desert. Either way, Marla Jennison didn't just walk away from her car. One of the patrol officers approached. "Sergeant Vance, dispatch just reported back on the welfare check. No one answered at Jennison's residence, but neighbors say they saw her leave yesterday afternoon with luggage, said she was driving to El Paso to visit family. That matches the direction she was heading. So she'd been on a road trip, probably driving alone, probably following the same route thousands of people took every day. And somewhere along this empty stretch of highway, something had gone very wrong. My radio crackled. Unit 501, this is dispatch. We've got a 911 call coming in from mile marker 279, approximately 5 miles east of your location. Female caller says she witnessed a woman being forced into a vehicle on the side of I-10 about 2 hours ago. Caller just pulled into a rest stop and worked up the courage to call it in. I felt adrenaline spike through my system. Copy that. Can you patch the call through to me? Stand by. There was a click, and then a woman's voice came through, shaky and scared. Hello? Are you the police? This is Sergeant Vance with the Highway Patrol. Ma'am, I understand you witnessed something on I-10 tonight. Can you tell me what you saw? I was driving east around 7 p.m., and I saw a silver car on the shoulder with its hazards on. There was a woman standing next to it, and a big truck pulled up behind her. I slowed down to see if they needed help, but then I saw the man get out of the truck and grab her. She was fighting, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. He forced her into his truck and drove off. I should have called right away, but I was scared. I'm sorry. Ma'am, you're doing the right thing by calling now. Can you describe the truck? It was dark-colored, black or dark blue maybe. A pickup truck, newer model, lifted suspension. I couldn't see the plates, but it had one of those chrome grills on the front. And the man, he was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. Did you see which direction the truck went? East, toward Wilcox. He pulled back onto the highway and drove off fast. The woman was in the cab with him. I saw her through the window. She looked terrified. I thanked the witness and got her contact information, then immediately called for additional units to set up roadblocks on I-10 East. But even as I gave the orders, I knew it was probably too late. 2 hours was more than enough time for someone to get off the interstate, take back roads, disappear into the vast network of rural routes that crisscrossed southern Arizona. Dax came over, his face pale. We're looking at an abduction, aren't we? Yeah, and we need to move fast. The first few hours are critical. I turned to the other officers. I want every rest stop, every gas station, every truck stop between here and the New Mexico border checked. Show Marla Jennison's photo, ask if anyone's seen her or a truck matching the description, and get the word out to Border Patrol, sheriff's departments, local PD, everyone. This guy grabbed her off a public highway. He's either very confident or very desperate. We split up, each unit taking a different section of the route. Dax and I headed east, stopping at every location where someone might have seen something. Gas station attendants, truck drivers taking breaks, rest stop maintenance workers. We showed Marla's photo dozens of times, asked the same questions over and over. No one had seen her. Around midnight, we pulled into a truck stop near Wilcox to regroup. I was standing outside the cruiser drinking bad coffee from a foam cup when Dax's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then his expression changed. Sergeant, that was dispatch. They just got a call from a rancher about 20 miles north of here. Said he heard screaming coming from an abandoned property adjacent to his land. Female screaming. Deputies are responding, but they want us there too. We were in the cruiser and moving within seconds, lights and sirens cutting through the dark. The ranch was accessed via a dirt road that wound through miles of empty grassland. We met the deputies at the turnoff, and together we approached the abandoned property. It was an old homestead, the kind that had probably been built in the 1940s or 50s and left to decay when the water dried up and the land stopped being viable for farming. There was a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings, all in various states of collapse. The rancher who'd called it in was waiting by his truck, a rifle slung over his shoulder. The screaming came from over there, he said, pointing toward the barn. Went on for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't go check myself. Figured I should call you folks instead. I pulled my weapon and approached the barn with Dax and 2 deputies. The door was hanging open and I could see light flickering inside, like from a lantern or flashlight. We entered carefully, clearing corners and checking blind spots. The barn was empty except for old hay bales and rusted equipment, but on the far wall there was a message spray-painted in red. "You're too late, Sergeant Vance." She's already gone. My name. Whoever had taken Marla Jennison knew who I was, and they'd left this message specifically for me to find. I stood in that abandoned barn, staring at the message on the wall, and felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Whoever had taken Marla Jennison knew my name. They'd planned this, waited for me specifically to respond to the call. This wasn't random, this was personal. Dax moved closer, his flashlight beam fixed on the spray paint. "Sergeant, how would they know you'd be the one to find this?" They've been watching, following patrol patterns, monitoring radio traffic, maybe tracking us for days or weeks. I pulled out my phone and photographed the message from multiple angles. This whole thing was staged. The blown tire, the abandoned car, the witness calling in 2 hours later. They wanted to make sure we'd be spread thin, searching in the wrong places while they had time to move her. One of the deputies checked the rest of the barn. No other signs of anyone being here recently. No footprints, no blood, nothing except that message. I called it in to dispatch, requesting forensic teams to process both the barn and the original vehicle location. Then I pulled Dax aside. "I need you to be straight with me. Have you noticed anyone following us during our shifts? Any vehicles that seem to show up too often? Any faces you've seen multiple times?" He thought for a moment. His young face creased with concentration. "There was a truck at the gas station in Benson yesterday. Dark blue Chevy, lifted suspension. I remember because the driver was just sitting in the cab, not pumping gas or going inside. Just sitting there watching the parking lot. When we pulled out, he pulled out too, but he turned off before we got to the highway." "Did you get a plate number?" "No, sir. I didn't think anything of it at the time." I fought down frustration. It wasn't his fault. He was a rookie, still learning what to look for. "From now on, you document everything. Any vehicle that seems out of place, any person who watches us too long, you write it down. Understood?" "Yes, sir." We drove back to the original crime scene, where the forensic team was still processing Marla's Honda. The lead tech, a woman named Sandra Briggs who I'd worked with on dozens of cases, waved me over when she saw me approaching. "Vance, we found something interesting. The blood in the trunk isn't the only evidence. There are fibers caught in the trunk latch, looks like rope or cord. And we found this wedged under the spare tire." She held up an evidence bag containing a small piece of paper, folded multiple times. "What is it?" "A receipt from a truck stop in Benson, dated 3 days ago. Cash purchase for diesel fuel and food. But here's the interesting part." She pointed to something written on the back of the receipt. "There's a phone number written in pen. We're running it now." My phone rang before I could respond. It was dispatch. "Sergeant Vance, we've got a hit on the phone number from the receipt. It's a prepaid cell, purchased 2 weeks ago at a convenience store in Tucson. The store's surveillance footage shows a white male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, 6 feet tall, paying cash. We're sending you the images now." The photos came through on my phone a moment later. The man's face was partially obscured by the bill of his baseball cap, but I could see enough to know he'd been careful. He'd kept his head down, avoided looking directly at the cameras, but there was something about his build, the way he carried himself, that seemed familiar. Run this through facial recognition and cross-reference with any similar cases in the region. I want to know if this guy has done this before. I looked at the time. It was almost 2 a.m. Marla Jennison had been missing for at least 7 hours now. The statistics on abduction cases were grim. The longer someone was missing, the less likely they were to be found alive. Dax approached with his laptop. "Sergeant, I've been reviewing traffic camera footage from I-10 for the past week. I found something you need to see." He pulled up several video clips, all showing the same dark blue Chevy truck passing through various checkpoints along the interstate. In each clip, the truck was traveling east, always during evening hours, always staying just under the speed limit. This truck has been making the same drive for at least 5 days in a row. Same time, same route, like they were practicing or scouting. Can you get a plate number from any of these? The resolution isn't great, but I managed to pull a partial from the Tucson checkpoint. I'm running it now. While he worked, I walked the perimeter of the crime scene one more time, trying to understand the timeline. The witness said she saw the abduction around 7 p.m. The 911 call came in at 9 p.m. That gave our suspect 2 full hours to get Marla off the interstate and hide her somewhere. But where? Southern Arizona is vast. Thousands of square miles of desert, mountains, and empty land. There are hundreds of abandoned buildings, mine shafts, old homesteads. You could hide someone out here for years, and no one would ever find them, unless you wanted them to be found. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I felt my stomach drop even before I opened it. The message contained a photograph of Marla Jennison. She was sitting on a dirt floor, her hands bound in front of her, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She was alive. The timestamp on the photo showed it had been taken 20 minutes ago. Below the image was a message. "She's alive, Sergeant, for now. But whether she stays that way depends on you. Go to mile marker 294 on I-10. Alone. You have 1 hour." I showed the message to Dax and the deputies. "He's making contact. Wants me to go to mile marker 294 alone." "That's a trap," one of the deputies said immediately. "You can't go by yourself." "I don't have a choice. If I show up with backup, he'll know. He's been watching us. He knows how many units we have on the road." Dax's face was grim. "Then let me follow at a distance. Stay far enough back that he won't see me, but close enough to respond if something goes wrong." It was risky, but it was better than going in completely alone. "All right, but you stay at least a mile back. No lights, no radio traffic unless I call for help. And if this goes bad, you call for every available unit. Don't try to be a hero." "Understood, sir." We drove to mile marker 294, Dax following at a careful distance. The location was even more isolated than the original scene, a stretch of highway that ran through a narrow pass between 2 rocky hills. There was an old rest stop here, closed for renovations years ago and never reopened. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the bathroom building was covered in graffiti. I pulled into the rest stop and parked near the building, leaving my headlights on. The place was silent except for the sound of wind whistling through the broken windows. I got out slowly, my hand near my weapon, scanning the area for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. Another message, this one spray-painted on the side of the bathroom building. "Check your trunk." I walked back to my cruiser, every instinct screaming that this was wrong. I popped the trunk and shined my flashlight inside. There was a cardboard box sitting in the center, about the size of a shoebox. A piece of paper was taped to the top with 3 words written in black marker. "Do you remember?" I carefully opened the box. Inside were case files. Old case files, yellowed with age. The pages brittle and water-stained. I pulled them out and started reading. They were missing persons reports, dating back over a decade. Women, mostly between the ages of 25 and 45, all last seen on I-10 between Tucson and the New Mexico border. 7 different women, 7 unsolved cases, and at the bottom of the box was a photograph. It showed me, much younger, in uniform standing next to another officer. The other officer was tall, dark-haired, wearing the same uniform. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Partners, 2011, Tucson 13. I recognized the other officer immediately. His name was Marcus Halloran. We'd worked together for 2 years before he'd transferred to a different district. He'd been a good cop, dedicated, by the book. We'd stayed in touch for a while after he transferred, but eventually lost contact the way people do. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it. "This is Vance." A distorted voice came through, electronically altered but still recognizable as male. "Do you remember Marcus Halloran, Sergeant?" "Yes. We worked together years ago. What does he have to do with this?" "Everything. Marcus was a very careful man, very methodical. He knew how to make people disappear without leaving evidence. 7 women over 5 years, all taken from your patrol route, and you never suspected a thing." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "You're saying Marcus Halloran killed those women?" "I'm saying your partner was a predator, and you were too blind to see it. Or maybe you did see it and you chose to look the other way. Either way, those women are dead because of him. And because of you. Where is Marcus now?" "Dead. Been dead for 3 years. Drove his car off a cliff near Payson. They ruled it an accident, but we both know better, don't we? He knew his time was running out. He knew someone was getting close to the truth. So he took the coward's way out. Who are you? How do you know all this?" "I'm someone who knows the truth. Someone who's been investigating Marcus for years. And now I'm going to prove what he did. Starting with Marla Jennison. She's his type, isn't she? Blonde, traveling alone, vulnerable. Just like all the others. Where is she? If you know something about those old cases, help me find her. Let me bring her home safely. That's not how this works, Sergeant. You had your chance to stop Marcus. You failed. Now you get to see what that failure looks like up close. Mile marker 306, 20 minutes. Come alone." The line went dead. I immediately called Dax. "I've got another location, mile marker 306, but this has gotten a lot more complicated. The suspect claims my former partner was responsible for multiple murders, and now he's trying to prove it by recreating one of the crimes." Dax's voice was tense. "Do you think it's true? About your old partner?" "I don't know. Marcus was a good cop. I never saw anything that suggested otherwise, but I need to follow this through. Stay on my tail, but keep your distance." I drove to mile marker 306, my mind racing. I thought back to my time working with Marcus. Had there been signs? Had I missed something? He'd always been intense, focused, sometimes working cases long after his shift ended. But that could describe half the officers I knew. It didn't make him a killer. Mile marker 306 was another isolated spot, this time near an old railroad overpass that hadn't been used in decades. I pulled off onto the shoulder and got out. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and debris across the empty highway. In the distance, I could see storm clouds gathering, lightning flickering on the horizon. There was a dirt road leading under the overpass, barely visible in the darkness. I followed it on foot, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. The road opened up into a small clearing surrounded by rock formations. And there, in the center of the clearing, was Marla Jennison's overnight bag, the same one we'd found in her trunk. I approached carefully, checking the surrounding area for any sign of an ambush. The bag was open, its contents scattered across the ground. Clothes, toiletries, personal items. But mixed in with Marla's belongings were other things. Jewelry that didn't belong to her. A woman's watch, a pair of glasses, items from other victims. My radio crackled, but the voice that came through wasn't dispatch. It was the distorted voice from the phone. "Do you see them, Sergeant? Trophies from Marcus's hunts. He kept them in a storage unit in Tucson, thought no one would ever find them. But I did, and now you have proof. Your partner was a monster." I keyed my radio. "If you have evidence of crimes, turn it over to the authorities. Let us handle this properly." The authorities had their chance. For 3 years, these cases sat unsolved. Those women's families got no justice, so now I'm giving them justice my way, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows that the great Sergeant Arlen Vance worked side by side with a serial killer and never noticed. Where is Marla Jennison? Closer than you think, Sergeant. In fact, I'd say she's about 50 yards to your left, in the drainage culvert under the overpass. Better hurry, it's going to rain soon, and those culverts flood fast. I ran toward the overpass, calling for Dax as I went. The culvert was a concrete tunnel about 4 feet in diameter, dark and filled with debris. I shined my light inside and saw her. Marla was at the far end, about 30 feet in, still bound but conscious. She was sitting in shallow water that was already starting to rise. "Marla, can you hear me? I'm with the highway patrol. I'm coming to get you." I crawled into the culvert, the space tight and claustrophobic. The water was cold and getting deeper by the second. Marla was crying, terrified, but alive. I reached her and started cutting through the ropes binding her wrists with my pocket knife. That's when I heard it. A deep rumbling sound, growing louder. Flash flood. The storm clouds I'd seen on the horizon were dumping rain somewhere upstream, and that water was heading straight for this culvert. The water was rising fast, already up to my knees, as I worked to free Marla from the ropes. The sound of the approaching flood was deafening, a roar that echoed through the concrete tunnel like a freight train. I could see the wall of water coming, maybe 20 seconds away, churning with debris and moving with terrifying speed. "Marla, listen to me. When I get these ropes off, we're going to move fast toward the entrance. Don't stop, don't look back. Understand?" She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. The last rope came free, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the mouth of the culvert. The water was at our waists now, the current trying to knock us off our feet. Behind us, the flood hit with the force of a sledgehammer, a 6-foot wall of brown water filled with rocks, branches, and debris. We scrambled forward, half running, half swimming through the tunnel as the water lifted us off our feet. I could see the opening ahead, Dax's silhouette backlit by his flashlight as he reached into the culvert. His hand grabbed my arm, and with strength I didn't know he had, he hauled both of us out onto the embankment, just as the full force of the flood tore through the tunnel behind us. We collapsed on the muddy ground, gasping for air. Marla was coughing up water, her whole body shaking. Dax was already calling for an ambulance, his voice steady despite the adrenaline that had to be coursing through him. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the dark sky, rain beginning to fall in heavy drops. "Sergeant, are you okay?" Dax asked, kneeling beside me. Yeah, I'm okay." I sat up and looked at Marla. "Are you hurt? Did he injure you?" She shook her head, still coughing. "He didn't hurt me. He just kept asking questions about you, about whether I knew who you were, whether I'd ever heard the name Marcus Halloran. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was so scared." "What did he look like?" "I never saw his face. He wore a mask, black cloth covering everything except his eyes. but his voice, even through the mask, it sounded young. Maybe 30s, 40s, and his hands. She paused, looking at her wrists where the ropes had chafed her skin. His hands were scarred. Burns, I think, old ones. An ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, followed by more patrol units. While the paramedics checked Marla over, I pulled Dax aside. I need you to run a search through our database. Anyone with a connection to Marcus Halloran. Family members, friends, people he arrested, victims' families from any of his cases. Someone with burn scars on their hands. You think this is personal? Someone connected to your old partner? Has to be. This whole thing is about Marcus. The old cases, the accusations, forcing me to face what he supposedly did. Someone wants me to know the truth, or wants everyone else to think they know the truth. Either way, they've been planning this for a long time. While Dax worked on the database search, I called the Tucson Police Department and requested access to Marcus Halloran's personnel file and any records from his death investigation. Within an hour, I was sitting in my cruiser reviewing digital copies of the documents. Marcus had been a good cop on paper. Commendations for bravery, high arrest rates, positive evaluations. Nothing that suggested he was anything other than a dedicated officer. His death in 2020 had been ruled accidental. He'd driven off a mountain road near Payson during a rainstorm, his vehicle going over a cliff and landing 200 feet below. By the time rescue crews reached the wreckage, he was already dead. But as I read the accident report more carefully, something caught my attention. The investigating officer had noted that Marcus's vehicle had no skid marks leading up to the edge, no signs that he'd tried to brake or correct his course. And toxicology had come back clean. He hadn't been drinking or using drugs, so why hadn't he tried to stop? My phone rang. It was the Phoenix Crime Lab. Sergeant Vance, this is Detective Briggs from Forensics. I've been processing the items you recovered tonight, specifically the jewelry and personal effects mixed with Ms. Jennison's belongings. What did you find? We were able to identify some of the items through serial numbers and distinctive markings. 3 of them match possessions reported missing by families of women who disappeared between 2011 and 2013. All of them were last seen on I-10 in your patrol area, and all of them were working with or interviewed by Marcus Halloran during the missing persons investigations. I felt sick. He was investigating their disappearances while being the one who took them. That's what the evidence suggests. He'd volunteered to lead the investigations, which gave him access to all the information about the victims, their families, the search efforts. He'd know exactly what evidence to avoid leaving, what mistakes other officers were making. It's actually brilliant in a horrifying way. Why wasn't this discovered before? Because the cases were spread out over years, in different jurisdictions. No one connected them until now, and once Halloran died, there was no reason to look at him as a suspect. Cold cases go unsolved all the time. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment. I'd worked with Marcus for 2 years, driven hundreds of miles of highway with him, shared meals, talked about our lives. Had there been signs? Moments where I should have seen something wrong? Or had he been that good at hiding what he was? Dax knocked on my window, breaking me out of my thoughts. Sergeant, I found something. Marcus Halloran had a younger brother, Aaron Halloran. He was severely burned in a house fire when he was 16. Marcus pulled him out, saved his life, but Aaron spent months in the hospital recovering. The scars were permanent, especially on his hands and arms. Where is Aaron now? That's the thing. He dropped off the grid about 4 years ago. No employment records, no address, no social media presence. It's like he disappeared. Right after Marcus died. Exactly. I pulled up Aaron Halloran's last known photograph from the DMV database. He would be 36 now, but the photo from 4 years ago showed a lean man with dark hair and intense eyes. Even through a photograph, you could see something haunted in his expression. "This is our guy," I said. "He's been investigating his brother's crimes, maybe suspected what Marcus was doing even before he died, and now he's trying to expose the truth by forcing me to see it. But why take Marla Jennison? Why recreate the crimes? Because he wants to prove a point. He wants everyone to understand what Marcus did, what kind of monster he was. And by making me go through this investigation, by showing me the evidence piece by piece, he's trying to make me take responsibility for not seeing it when it mattered." My radio crackled. "Unit 501, this is dispatch. We've got another 911 call, this one from a rest stop at mile marker 318. Anonymous caller says there's a vehicle in the parking lot with someone inside who appears to be unconscious. Mile marker 318. That was 12 miles east of our current location." I looked at Dax. "He's not done. Let's go." We drove to the rest stop with lights but no siren, not wanting to spook whoever might be there. The facility was one of the nicer ones on this stretch, with clean bathrooms, vending machines, and a covered picnic area. There were 3 vehicles in the parking lot. 2 were empty, doors locked. The third was a dark blue Chevy truck with lifted suspension, matching the description from the witness who'd seen the abduction. I approached carefully, weapon drawn. Through the tinted windows I could see someone in the driver's seat, slumped forward against the steering wheel. I tried the door, unlocked. I pulled it open and checked the person's pulse. It was a man, mid-30s, wearing dark clothes. His hands bore extensive burn scars. Aaron Halloran. And he was dead, a single gunshot wound to the chest. On the seat beside him was a revolver and a manila envelope. I checked the gun first. It had been fired recently, 1 round spent, but the angle was wrong for suicide. Someone had shot him and staged it to look self-inflicted. I carefully opened the envelope, using my pen to avoid leaving prints. Inside were more documents: birth certificates, medical records, psychiatric evaluations, all belonging to Aaron Halloran. The psychiatric records dated from his teenage years, after the fire. Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, obsessive behavior. The last evaluation, from 3 years ago, noted concerns about Aaron's fixation on his brother's death and his belief that Marcus had been punishing bad people. But there was something else in the envelope: a USB drive. I bagged it as evidence and called for the crime scene team. While we waited, Dax did a thorough search of the truck. In the back seat he found a laptop, still powered on. "Sergeant, you need to see this." The laptop screen showed a video file paused mid-playback. Dax hit play, and we watched as the screen filled with footage from a body camera. It took me a moment to recognize the perspective. It was Marcus's point of view, recorded on his duty camera, from a traffic stop dated September 2012. The footage showed Marcus pulling over a silver sedan on I-10. He approached the driver's side, and a blonde woman in her 30s rolled down her window. Marcus asked for license and registration. The woman complied, and Marcus walked back to his patrol car to run the information. But instead of running it through the system, the footage showed him putting something in his pocket and returning to the woman's car. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." The woman looked confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "Just a routine check. Step out, please." As the woman got out, the footage showed Marcus glancing around, making sure no other vehicles were nearby. Then, in a move so fast it was almost invisible, he grabbed the woman and forced something over her face. A cloth, probably soaked in chloroform, or another sedative. She struggled for only a few seconds before going limp. The video cut out. Dax and I stared at the blank screen. "He recorded his own crimes," Dax said quietly. "And Aaron found the recordings. That's how he knew. That's how he was so sure. I looked back at Aaron's body in the truck. But if Aaron's dead, then who shot him? Who's been orchestrating all of this? As if in answer, my phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. This time it was a video file. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The footage showed a man I recognized immediately. Marcus Halloran, alive, sitting in what looked like a basement or underground room. The timestamp on the video was from yesterday. Marcus looked directly at the camera and spoke. "If you're watching this, Arlen, it means everything has gone according to plan. You've found the evidence. You've seen what I did. And you've learned the truth. I didn't die in that crash 3 years ago. I disappeared, started over. And I've been watching you all this time, waiting for the right moment to reveal myself." He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. "My brother Aaron found out what I was. He tried to stop me, tried to turn me in. So I killed him tonight and left him for you to find. One more victim to add to the list. And now you have a choice, Arlen. You can tell the world what I am, destroy my reputation, ruin my family's name. Or you can stay quiet and I'll disappear again. Either way, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you worked alongside a killer and never suspected a thing." The video ended, and beneath it was a new message. "I'm closer than you think, Sergeant. Look behind you." I spun around, my hand going to my weapon, scanning the parking lot behind me. Nothing, just empty spaces. The hum of vending machines and the rustle of wind through the desert scrub. But the message had been clear. Marcus was here, somewhere close, watching us work the scene. Dax had his weapon drawn too, moving to cover my blind spots. "Sergeant, we need to call for backup, every available unit." "Do it, but stay alert. He's been ahead of us this whole time. He knows our procedures, our response times, how we think." I kept my voice low, my eyes constantly moving across the landscape. The rest stop sat in a shallow depression between two hills, giving plenty of high ground for someone with a rifle and a scope. "Get behind the truck. Use it for cover." We moved quickly, using Aaron's vehicle as a barrier between us and the surrounding terrain. Dax called in the situation while I tried to think like Marcus would think. He'd killed his own brother and left the body for us to find. He'd sent that video knowing it would force us to respond to this location. So, what was his endgame? Did he want to be caught? Did he want a confrontation? Or was this all just another setup to humiliate me further? My phone buzzed again. Text message, the laptop, check the browser history. I looked at Dax, who'd already secured the laptop in an evidence bag. He pulled it out carefully and opened it. The browser history showed a single website visited multiple times over the past week. It was a file-sharing site, and the most recent upload was titled "The Truth About Marcus Halloran." I clicked the link. It opened to a video file, already uploaded and set to go public in 24 hours. I hit play. The video was a professionally edited, documentary-style piece, complete with title cards and news footage. It detailed Marcus Halloran's career, his commendations, his reputation, and then it systematically destroyed all of it. The video showed each of the 7 missing women, their faces, their families, their stories. It showed the investigation reports where Marcus had been the lead detective. It showed the body camera footage of him abducting the women, drugging them, loading them into his personal vehicle. The footage was damning, irrefutable proof of what he'd done. And at the end of the video was footage of me, clips from news interviews, traffic stops, press conferences. The narration claimed I'd been Marcus's partner during the peak of his killing spree. It questioned how I could have worked so closely with him and never noticed. It suggested I might have been complicit, or at the very least, criminally negligent. The video ended with a challenge. In 24 hours, the world will know the truth. Sergeant Arlen Vance has one day to find Marcus Halloran and bring him to justice, or his own reputation will be destroyed along with his partner's. The clock is ticking. I closed the laptop, feeling a weight settle on my chest. This was never about Marla Jennison. She was just a tool, a way to get my attention and drag me into this game. This had always been about Marcus and me, about exposing what he'd done and making sure I paid the price for not stopping him. 3 patrol cars pulled into the rest stop, followed by an ambulance and a crime scene van. I briefed the responding officers quickly, giving them Marcus's description and last known photograph. I want roadblocks on every major route within 50 miles. Check every vehicle, every driver. Marcus Halloran is armed, dangerous, and he knows law enforcement tactics. Treat any contact as a potential deadly force situation. While the scene was being processed, I pulled Dax aside. I need you to do something for me. Take my personal phone and go through every call, every message, every piece of data from the past 3 years. Marcus has been watching me, which means he's had access to my information somehow. I need to know how he's been tracking me. Dax took the phone and got to work. 15 minutes later, his face was grim. Sergeant, you've got spyware on your phone. It's been there for at least 2 years, logging your location, your calls, your messages, everything. Can you trace where it's sending the data? It's routing through multiple servers, probably to hide the final destination, but I can try to track it. He worked quietly for several minutes, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Got something. The data's being sent to a physical location, an address in Benson, about 40 miles west of here. I knew Benson. It was a small town, mostly residential with a few motels and gas stations serving travelers on I-10. What's at the address? According to county records, it's a storage facility. Unit 247 is registered under the name M. Calloway. My blood ran cold. Calloway. That was the name of the officer from the Navajo County case, the one who'd dealt with the mannequins and the buried bodies. Marcus was connecting all of us, drawing lines between separate investigations, creating a web that implicated multiple officers. He's setting up other cops, trying to make it look like there was a conspiracy, like multiple officers were involved in covering up his crimes. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, I need you to contact Trooper Wes Calloway in Navajo County immediately. Tell him his name is being used in connection with an active investigation and he may be a target. Copy that, Sergeant. Anything else? Send backup to the Benson Storage Facility, 1440 Desert View Road, Unit 247. Possible suspect location. Proceed with extreme caution. The drive to Benson took 35 minutes, every second feeling like an hour. By the time we arrived, 6 patrol units were already on scene. Officers positioned around the storage facility with weapons drawn. The manager had provided access codes, and the gate was open. Unit 247 was in the back corner of the facility, a 10x20 space with a roll-up door. I could see light seeping out from under the door, and I could hear something inside. Music, playing softly. Something classical, violins and piano. The tactical commander approached. Sergeant Vance, we've got the perimeter secured. Thermal imaging shows one person inside the unit, sitting in a chair. No movement. Could be a trap. Could be Marcus waiting for us. I checked my weapon and put on a ballistic vest. I'm going in first. If he wanted to ambush us, he would have done it by now. He wants to talk. Sir, I strongly advise, noted, but this is personal. He's been orchestrating this whole thing to get to me specifically. Let me finish it. I approached the unit with Dax and 2 tactical officers behind me. The music grew louder as we got closer. Mozart, I realized. Marcus had always liked classical music. Said it helped him think. I grabbed the handle of the roll-up door and slowly lifted it. The door rose with a metallic screech, revealing the interior of the storage unit. It had been converted into a living space. A cot in one corner, a small desk with a laptop, shelves lined with supplies and equipment. And sitting in a folding chair in the center of the space was Marcus Halloran. He looked older than I remembered, his hair gray at the temples, his face lined with stress. But it was definitely him. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, and his hands were folded calmly in his lap. When he saw me, he smiled. "Hello, Arlen. It's been a long time." I kept my weapon trained on him. "Marcus Halloran, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and assault. Put your hands on your head and stand up slowly." Of course. I'm not going to resist. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "You know, I've imagined this moment for 3 years. Wondered what you'd say, how you'd react when you finally learned the truth. Are you angry, betrayed, or just relieved that you can finally stop wondering?" "I never wondered. I never suspected you because I trusted you. We were partners. And that trust made you blind. I was killing those women while you sat 10 feet away, filling out reports. I was planning my next hunt while we shared meals in truck stop diners. And you never saw it because you didn't want to see it." He raised his hands as the tactical officers moved in to cuff him. "That's the real lesson here, Arlen. Good cops can miss what's right in front of them if it doesn't fit their narrative." As they secured him, I stepped closer. Why fake your death? Why hide for 3 years just to come back now? Because I needed time. Time to plan this properly, to gather all the evidence, to make sure when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. And I needed someone to care, someone to be motivated to find me. That someone was you. He looked at me with those same steady eyes I'd known for years. "You're a good man, Arlen. Better than me, certainly, but you failed those women just as much as I killed them. You had a chance to stop me, and you didn't." The officers led him toward a patrol car. I stood there in the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of his double life, and felt a hollowness I couldn't quite name. He was right, in a terrible way. I had missed it. I'd worked alongside a serial killer and never suspected a thing. Dax approached carefully. "Sergeant, the laptop in here has more evidence. Financial records showing he'd been living under false identities, surveillance footage of other officers, plans for additional crimes. We're going to need days to process all of this. Secure everything and get a message to every officer whose name appears in those files. They need to know their information was compromised." As the crime scene team moved in, I walked outside and stood in the parking lot, watching as they loaded Marcus into the back of a patrol car. He looked out the window at me, still smiling, like this was all exactly what he'd wanted. My phone buzzed. Not a call or text this time, but a news alert. The video had gone live. Not in 24 hours like promised, but now. Marcus had set it to upload automatically the moment he was arrested. I opened the link and watched as my career, my reputation, everything I'd built over 16 years, was systematically dismantled in front of millions of viewers. The media would be calling within minutes. Internal Affairs would launch an investigation. Every case I'd ever worked would be scrutinized. Even if they found no evidence of wrongdoing, the suspicion would follow me forever. Dax stood beside me, watching the video on his own phone. "Sergeant, for what it's worth, I don't believe you had anything to do with what he did. No one who's worked with you would believe that. Doesn't matter what people who know me believe. What matters is what everyone else thinks, and Marcus just made sure they'll always wonder." We drove back to Tucson as dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I-10 stretched ahead, the same highway I'd patrolled for over a decade. and I wondered how many other secrets it held. How many other monsters had used these roads to hunt and hide. 3 days later, Marcus was processed and charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage, the victim's belongings, forensic evidence linking him to the crimes. It was an airtight case, but the damage was done. The video had been viewed millions of times. News organizations ran specials questioning how a serial killer had operated openly for years while his partner remained oblivious. Internal Affairs cleared me of any wrongdoing, but the stain remained. I requested a transfer to a desk job. It was approved immediately. They were probably relieved to get me off the roads, away from public view. Officer Dax Halverson took over my patrol route. He was good at the job, better than I'd been at his age. He'd learn the highway, learn the patterns, learn which spots were dangerous and which were safe. And maybe, eventually, he'd learn that the highway never really lets you go. That once you've seen the darkness, it hides, you carry it with you forever. On my last day of highway patrol, I drove I-10 one final time, from Tucson to the New Mexico border and back. It was a clear November evening, traffic light, the desert peaceful under a sky full of stars. At mile marker 274, where we'd found Marla Jennison's abandoned car, I pulled onto the shoulder and sat with the engine idling. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a photograph of Marcus in his jail cell, taken from outside the bars. He was sitting on his bunk, looking directly at the camera, smiling. Below the image was a message. There are 7 more you never found, Arlen. 7 more families still waiting. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering where they are. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. He was playing games, trying to maintain control even from behind bars. There probably weren't 7 more victims. Probably. But the uncertainty would eat at me forever. That was his final gift. Not death, not violence, but doubt. The question that could never be fully answered. What else had I missed? I pulled back onto the highway and drove toward Tucson, watching the white lines blur past in the darkness. Behind me, the desert stretched out endlessly, holding its secrets close. And somewhere out there, in that vast empty space, there might be 7 more graves that would never be found. Or maybe Marcus was just lying, and this was all part of the game he'd been playing since the beginning. Either way, I'd never know for sure. And that uncertainty would follow me for the rest of my life. A shadow that never quite left, a question that could never quite be answered. The highway disappeared into the night behind me, and I drove on into whatever came next.